Right, awesome. So I guess I will get us started off then. Hi, I'm Rev. I am the founder and designer for Thought Police. Um, we're sort of best known for the Motif Story Engine, which is like a solo toolkit or a GM assistant that you can use to run pretty much any role-playing game solo or whatever. And that is what the Motif SRD is based on. Uh, Lex and Renee, if you'd like to
Yeah.
give.
I'm Lex, Titanomachy RPG on Twitter. I created the Caltrip Core SRD, which is a D4 based dice system for making your own games really fast, really easy, designed specifically for new game designers in mind, but also anybody can use it and add any sort of depth and complexity that they would like.
All right. I'm René Pierre, but you can call me RP. I'm a game designer at Fari RPGs, and I'm also the designer of the Charge system, Charge SRD. So Charge is an action-packed game with forward momentum, which so basically it was originally a generic game system, and it was transferred to an SRD so that people could make powered by Charge games, which are very action focused, and it's also forked on the Forge in the Dark system. So if you're familiar with Blades in the Dark, should feel pretty comfortable playing around with Charge.
Awesome. So today what we were going to do is all three of us are going to go over kind of the same concept through our SRDs. And each of us will take it in our own individual directions and everything. But the important part is we're going to kind of express how we look at game design and how you can take this concept through all of our SRDs together. Um, and a big part of it that we're all happy and excited about is that, we have three different SRDs, three different authors. We're all unrelated to each other, but we're all just here together to have a good time and support each other and, non-competitive, just
Mhm.
collaborative spirit. And that's part of what I love about it. So, um, the concept that we're going with is hyper reality or hyper reality. Uh, Basically, in the future, um, humanity and the internet and reality have all blended together. And you're somebody who's been woken up to help try to solve a problem of a virus spreading, convincing people that there's a real world out there beyond the quantum web. And yeah, you've been woken up to help solve it, and so we're kind of leaving it at the general concept that's already a little bit gonzo of a or out there of a sci-fi concept, so that we're each individually going to go through that with you, and then afterward we'll answer any of your questions and um, help you out with any game design questions you have, or specifically about our SRDs. Um, is there anything either of you two would like to add in intro there? Or?
No, I'm just really excited that we'll be having gone through all three of the SRDs and seeing the what each one focuses on and what the tool set each gives you to make a game. The different approaches should be pretty interesting, and I'm excited. I've been sort of thinking about it on the back burner over the past day or two, and I'm like I might make the game that I'm going to talk about today because it's actually kind of cool. It's like a really
Yeah,
cool concept
no,
Rev
no, no.
that
I
Rev
mean,
came
this
up
might
with.
just be our first draft, and I might need to do a little testing, but absolutely, it does sound
Yeah.
like a fun concept. So we might have to talk about doing a bundle afterward.
Yeah, hyper reality bundle.
Oh yeah, like definitely. And what's really exciting is that all of our SRDs are so very different from one
Yeah.
another, and they all try
Oh,
to solve
yeah.
very different problems. And taking the same game concept and see what we can create from those three SRDs is going to be something that's really, really exciting.
So maybe that might be a good place to start off. As you both mentioned, we all do things a little bit differently. So just to sort of give people an idea of what to expect, each of us maybe can go over our like brief SRD concept. So the Motif SRD is a bit more of a framework than a specific system. But it arose from the story engine, actually. It was originally a standalone solo tool before it was a game engine. So a big part of sort of the motif way, so to speak, is that you're not doing metrics. It's not, is this DC high enough to hit this many yards of distance? It's an oracle. It answers questions. So that can be something as simple as, do I succeed or not? But really anything you can answer in a split of 2 or 3 different ways can be answered by a motif. Game I just released, Eat Trash Do Crime, about sentient raccoons, doesn't have pass fail. Its 2 main factors are sneaky, how sneaky are you, and the degree of success. You just basically always succeed in almost anything you try. And so there's no sense in pass fail. It's just how, is it, do I do it? Does it take me a long time? But with the raccoons, you can imagine like sneak and success degree, like, oh, it's going slow and I did bad on sneak, so I take too long and the guards come around.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of a good example, is that motif answers questions, and so it leans into a storytelling kind of vibe rather than per se like narrative, like some modern games are. It's not focused on that so much as like literal storytelling. So you lean into genres and do your themes. As RP put it yesterday, and I'm still humiliated that I never thought of it myself, you might say that you need a motif. I'll pass it on to one of you.
Go for it, RP.
Right. Okay. So charge is quite different from motif and even cultural core, as charge is focused really on action. It's focused on rewarding interaction with the game, and it's also focused on really like it's narrative driven, and it's made for telling interesting stories about proactive characters. This isn't a system where characters are meant to like survive, and like where the system is going to be very, very harsh against the players. It's a system that's meant for them to interact with, and they're going to be rewarded when they do so. So the type of games you can do with charge is basically any type of games where characters are like facing challenges and they need to push forward against all odds. And basically the way that charge encourages players to interact with the game is instead of punishing them when they basically take actions, it rewards them. So basically, when you make an action, you have a chance of generating what I call momentum. And with momentum, you can boost your rolls, you can assist allies and whatnot. And the entire game is basically framed around this this gameplay loop of like, you're taking an action, you've succeeded or partially succeeded, but you've gained some momentum, and with it, you're going to be able to like try again and do something else and spend that momentum. So it's basically, instead of having a bunch of resources that are like expended over time, you basically start with no resources, and to gain them, you need to play. So players like jump straight into the action and get kind of addicted to this feeling of, well, when I do something, I get something out of it. So that's pretty cool. And fun fact, this was actually inspired. I don't know if y'all have played Spider-Man on PS4, PS5, but it's basically kind of like the same concept where Spider-Man like fights enemies, and when you fight enemies, you get rewarded with focus, and you spend that focus to make like cool moves or to heal yourself. So I was playing this game, and then this idea, the core idea of charge, basically came from this.
That's so cool. Yeah, I was reading through both of your SRDs in prep for today, and like the Oracle system, the way Rev you described motif is so it's like at first I was like, why is it an Oracle system? And you get into the things and it's like, oh, like you throw the dice and then the dice sort of like inspire, you get to like interpret the dice and sort of tell sort of like a prompt for the story, where like even the positioning of the dice in physical space affect how you interpret the roles, which is not something that I've seen before in games. Granted, I'm pretty new, and I'll get into that when I explain my SRD. But like that's a really cool thing. And then like charge is like, get into the action. Your character has these abilities. You get this resource. Let's go, go, go. Caltrip Core comes from I built it not from any game that I made or any existing game but it was more of like, so essentially it's just a D4 pool system where you have degrees of success based on if you roll a 1, 2, 3, or 4, but you roll a pool of D4s and then you take the highest result. Very much inspired by Spencer Campbell's Lumen system, as well as there's some like Wander Home influences from J Dragon and Possum Creek games. Um, and really it's this, I made the system specifically as a tool for people to create their own games. So rather than like when you have like the D&D SRD, which is like all like the core things that you need to like build off of, build your own setting or whatever it is, but there's like a actual game that goes with it. Caltrip Core is not playable. Like you cannot pick up Caltrip Core and play a game because it's just not a game. It's a tool, and these SRDs are as well. But like I didn't have a game that I created first and then used the system, separated the system out later. It was really just like we were talking on Twitter with some friends, just like as a joke, like, oh, you could do a D4s, and Maps and Quest was like, oh, you could call it Caltrip system because they're pointy, they hurt to step on, cool. So I took that idea, I was like, oh, let me try and design something with this, and I realized I didn't have anything yet, so I just wrote out like what happens on a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, and then from there you have a very basic storytelling or like RPG core dice system, whereas like in a D20 system you have DCs and all this stuff that you have to adjust and all that thing, which can be fun and can be useful for like more granular tactical and role-playing stuff. For Caltrip Core, it's just on a 1 you don't get what you want and and things get worse. On a 2 you don't get what you want and then that's it, you're sort of like hanging in suspension. 3 is you get what you want, but then there's like a twist or a complication, so there can still be like sort of narrative consequences for getting what you want. And then a 4 is you get what you want and more. And so my whole thing was like, how do I boil down the sort of intel that I've gained from being a new game designer over the past actually less than a year? How can I boil that down into like a package that other people can use to make their own games? Because when you're starting to make games, it's very intimidating. Like, I don't know how to do this. Where do I start? I'm not qualified for this, that sort of idea. But if people can just have like a little bit of a help, and really the whole thing can fit on one page, it's like a little table. It's just like a little 1 through 4 table. And if you can understand that concept and how to build games with that, then you can start building more complicated things. And I think like me personally, Caltrip Core is great for like quick sketches or like rules like games, narrative focused games. Tactical combat's a little more difficult, but it's possible. I think the reason to use Caltrip Core is just like if you're new and you're a little easily overwhelmed, or you just want to try something out, like a really weird game idea. Like, I mean, there's over 100 now of people making just like the weirdest games I could possibly imagine. But like you don't want to like put a whole like 3 months, 6 months of work into it. You don't know if it's going to work. Do a little sketch in Caltrip Core, see if it's fun, see if the concept can work in a TTRPG, and that's really the main focus of the thing. And if you want something that has more tools and more like robust systems to support the kinds of stories you want to tell, Motif and Charge both do a great job of different things. So like definitely go check those out, because like Caltrip Core, even though it is like a beginner friendly thing, does not give you a lot of tech to work with, whereas like Charge has a lot of clocks, and the Motif has like the different like flavors, and like the third die can be a whole bunch of different things, and there's like lots of examples in the SRD of what you can do with it. Really, it all depends on like what you need from your game, and I think that's why we're also like happy to be sharing our stuff and like going alongside each other, is because like if you want to make a game that's more suited to Charge RPG, please do that. It's not going to be as like fun or easy to make in Caltrip Core, because you're gonna have to make the clocks yourself, which RP already did. Why reinvent the clock when it's already there? Like Caltrip Core is very much what you get out of it, what you put into it. But a lot of these other systems have a lot more support for different types of feels and game design, and Motif has like, you could pretty much do any genre. If you look at the play examples in Motif, it's like every single genre that you could possibly think of. There's sci-fi examples, there's fantasy examples, there's all sorts of cool stuff. And today we're going to do that really cool hyper reality.
I'll put a pin in that for a second, though. What I will say about Motif is like just because of the way sort of tabletop discourse works, like, oh, my favorite system can do literally anything. Motif can do most any genre because it is designed for genre emulation. That it's based on that storytelling focus. But if you try to run a gritty simulation type game or high tactics game, you're gonna have a bad time trying to make that motif. But that is one thing that I do like about all three of the SRDs that we're working with here is that they're all sort of we often talk a lot about simulation or not simulation. But I like sort of there was a zeitgeist with Powered by the Apocalypse for a little bit with that mindset of genre emulation, and I feel like that is a strength that all three of the SRDs share, is that they're all very good at emulating genres. I think what Caltrop works great at is like I would say it's almost like a television series kind of feel with the way the steps work and in the degrees of success and failure work. It when I've played a couple of Caltrop core games, it's come out feeling almost like that TV kind of pacing.
That's really interesting. I didn't think of that, but it makes sense because like Nighthawks, which is like the first game I released on Caltrip Core, is like a narrative focused game, and like it does almost always end like in around the same amount of time, and it's like you play one session of it, usually takes around 2 hours, and like it's like an episode of these characters, a snapshot in time of these characters in a specific place, and it does do that well. So like I didn't think about it like TV, but that's like a really cool way of thinking of it.
Television writing is kind of the way it came across to me. The way the answers space out and play, kind of almost. I mean,
Yeah, like there's like the story beats of like the roles.
yeah, there's like
have,
a certain
those.
rhythm to it.
That's really cool.
And so
yeah.
TV series is how I think of Caltrop Core, and then Charge I think of like popcorn flicks and action movies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot like
Yeah.
like it would be really great for doing like
Fast and Furious.
like an MCU style game.
Yeah.
Or while it's based on Blades and Blades does have that heist element, Charge feels like again like that popcorn movie, action movie, like Ocean's 11 kind of feel. More
Everything's a
than
little
sort
larger
of
than life.
more than sort of like the thieving mission heists like Blades has.
Mhm.
Like Charge just feels like right in that lane of like Ocean's 11 or going towards the other side of like the popcorn action divide like the MCU. Like I think Charge is perfect for that. And so
it's funny you mentioned that because like initially like I was running 2 Fate campaigns with my like 2 usual groups, and one of them was based in the Avatar Last Airbender universe, and the other one was like kind of like Fate of Cthulhu, like Lovecraft.
Oh wow, very
vibe.
different.
Very different vibes. And one thing that came up often in the Lovecraft based game is like my players didn't like to fail. My players didn't like, they were like, oh, it feels like the game is playing against us. It feels like things are very harsh and we're like probably going to die. And I reread the book, like Fate of Cthulhu, and it's like, yeah, the players are going to die. They're fighting like gods, and that's not going to go well. And basically, like that's basically the point where I was like, okay, I need to make something that my players will enjoy, like over the top action game. And I think like the MCU comparison kind of like works very well. And again, like kind of came from a mechanic from a Spider-Man game, so it's all linked, I guess.
It's sort of like that AAA feel of like just like go. You're like an action hero. You get to do stuff. I could see like I really could see Fast and Furious working really well in Charge of, and you like spending a lot of momentum to like jump out of to like drive a car out of one building and into another. That sort of like really over the top action stuff. Like that's like can be really fun in your games. Like I know like some people like the Call of Cthulhu style where like and like the OSR like Morkborg style of like you're gonna die, you're a piece of shit, it's fine, go for it, just go. And like the game punishes you, and like if you like that, that's cool. Like that's fun for you, great. But like, with charge, it's like, all right, just gonna fucking kick ass and keep going. Actually, that would be a cool tagline: kick ass and keep going.
Yeah.
But
That's how the Dicebreaker article should have mentioned
it should
charge.
have,
Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there you go. And then for
Uh,
motif, to contrast those two, motif is sort of more of the um like literary campfire sort of end of those things there. Uh so with motif, again, the focus is very much on the storytelling, leaning real hard into the genres and tropes and stuff. So if you want to emulate sort of like Pulp Fiction, and not necessarily like big screen two-fisted Pulp Fiction, but like actual like Pulp Fiction, like Howard and such, John Carter of Mars, or even uh, Motif is really good at that because it introduces the kind of wild twists and variation. It's very swingy, but that's by design. I lean into that. So with the very swinginess of it, like you can have a role where you have a yes and then a no but, and that's sort of with the simple build. So it doesn't have that kind of same sense of pacing that Charge or Caltrop has.
I was thinking
But
even that like that motif is comparable to like prestige television of like like a Game of Thrones or like the sort of like longer like Walking Dead style of like
yeah,
these very genre forward works where like it's like you're like in it and you're in it and you're just like going and like the dice are sort of like leading you on this story that's like
it's
not
like the
necessarily about the like fast pacing, but like there is still like that like rhythm of prestige television. Like if we're gonna keep with that metaphor.
it's like
yeah,
the
yeah, that makes
Telltale's game,
sense.
right?
What was that?
Oh, I was saying it's like the Telltale's game, like
Oh, there you go. Yeah, actually, yeah, that's you probably could adapt it to do something like that too. So I think we've gone over our basic concepts here. And
Yeah.
hello to Alex and Kata and Kev and
Hey Kev.
Mecca and everybody, people who joined us. Um, if you came in a little bit late, we were just kind of going over our concepts here. What each SRD feels like and does best, and now we're about to get into our build. So, which one of you would like to go first with your core concept of how you're approaching this, like what you're thinking about for hyper reality?
maybe since a couple of people have joined, maybe we could repeat a bit with the concept of the
Oh
game
yeah,
to start
absolutely.
from.
So the concept we're all building off of is sort of a little bit of a gonzo sci-fi concept called hyper reality. There is the quantum web. Humanity and the internet and reality have all merged into one. You're troubleshooters that are being woken up for help because there's a virus spreading, convincing people that there's a real world to escape to. But there isn't, so as you can imagine, think of like if a doomsday cults took over major cities, which in the quantum web you could call subnets or networks. And terminals are the individual people in there, and it's sort of left ambiguous on purpose whether any given person is an AI or a person who was jacked into it. So,
I love it.
I can go. I have like a basic concept that I've sort of been tinkering with like since like yesterday. So in Caltrip Core, there's not a ton of granularity in like the very foundation of it. It's you can choose either stats or tokens, and these are not mutually exclusive, but just like as basic frameworks to get you started. We all love our stats. A lot of people play D&D, so um, you could do 3 to 4 stats. If you want more stats, you can absolutely go up to 6, like the classic. You go more. I think I was talking to people on Twitter about this. 4 people seem to like 4 stats because you can get 3 main, like body, mind, heart, or whatever type of deal, and then 1 like sort of wacky a flavorful one, like I don't know, would just call it like ether. It's always something like weird like that, and that sort of represents something that's particular to your world. So let's just make quantum one of the stats. You have like your body, you have your mind, you have your emotions, and then you have quantum, which is sort of um, how well you're able to like navigate and like affect the it's almost like a magic stat, I would say. So like hackers and stuff, or people using this sort of like um innate ability to shape the hyper reality, the quantum web, with some sort of like innate power, and that stat can kind of represent that. And that's sort of like your core character idea is just like these. You assign a value between 1 and 3 to each of them. You could probably put a limit. You could do a standard array. What I like to do is usually I'll like offer a standard array to people so that they can just assign their stats to the different ones if they want to do that. Once you get over like 4 or 5 in the system, the chance of failure becomes pretty negligible, and it kind of gets a little boring. So the character creation process is not as detailed in this one as it might be in some of the other SRDs that we'll get to today, and that those are really fun. What I was also thinking of, because that sort of like character part is really simple, and you want to add like abilities and features. Um, you want to design those abilities and features around the core gameplay so that it feels useful and it feels fun. And I was thinking this could be a cool idea for a hex crawl where you have like your little group of troubleshooters who are like in a city that's being overrun by this virus, these like sort of viral cultists, and you're sort of like clearing out different sectors either by like completing some sort of mission, right? So either it's taking down a ringleader of a local chapter of this cult. It could be going and making a new ally. It could be running deliveries for someone powerful in exchange for a favor. Any of these sort of things, and you can have like a hex map in front of everybody where you're like sort of clearing these things out and sort of like grabbing new resources and different obstacles getting in your way, and your goal is to sort of like uh, expand and maintain the sort of ideological territory to save people who are like doing a lot of bad thing, or stop people who are doing bad things, save people from being affected by those. I'm also thinking of like there was a obscure, I don't know if it was obscure or not, but like there was a movie called The Discovery on Netflix a little while back where essentially there was proof that the afterlife exists, and the afterlife, like they got scientific proof that the afterlife is real. And so what you had was a bunch of people, content warning for self-harm. So we'll give you a chance to mute me for a second. People were like killing themselves to get to the afterlife, and there was throughout the movie there was this big counter in a lot of the frames of like how many people had done this, and so it was getting to like the millions, and it's this very like urgent and very bleak way, even though like the afterlife existing being kind of hopeful. They weren't sure what the afterlife was, but people were like, "Oh, this confirms my belief in such and such thing." And so what you could do is like you would be saving people from the influence of these doomsday cults that would causing these people to presumably like end their lives in order to get to the quote unquote real world, which in our concept doesn't exist. And so I was also thinking um, another thing to do, and this is similar to the clocks in both of these other SRDs today, but like a politics die. So like maybe there's an overarching organization and you roll a d4 and there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 according to the caltrip thing, and that's going to make your next hex mission harder or easier, right? If you roll a 4, maybe you get a bunch of extra resources to go complete that mission with ease. You roll a 1, there's some new draconian policy that stopped you and your team from doing what they need to do. And then so it just like keeps changing as you go through each hex. Even if it's a similar mission, there might be a different overall feel to it. So that's sort of like the basic thing I would do, where it's like a bit more of like a mission-based free form. Go pick out some missions at the local board, complete them, expand your territory, and save the world. That's sort of like what I was thinking to do with Caltrip Core. But you'll notice you have to do a lot of things manually, right? A lot of like hex. I'm bringing hex tech from blog posts that I've seen. I'm bringing in clocks and different politics die to affect the overall story. But if we wanted to talk about clocks, I think charge is actually a really great way. I mean, Motif has clocks too, but charges really features them prominently.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I kind of
So
like the
RP, if you want to kind of go over how your impression of the concept.
Yeah, definitely. Just want to bounce back quickly on what Lex was saying.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of like bringing like a next map there where like you kind of build your influence. I think it connects really well with the genre in general, and like bringing like some sort of like engagement role using like the culture core system is like I think that's very clever.
Thank you, appreciate it. I was last
Yeah,
night
it's
I was
very
falling
elegant.
asleep, and I was like I had this idea right as I was falling asleep. I was like, if I don't write this down, I'm gonna forget tomorrow morning. So I like got my phone. It's like I gotta write this down. This is actually like this is actually really good. You ever have that feeling about your own ideas?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so in terms of charts, I was taking some notes yesterday and this morning about how I think like character creation and mechanics could work for this concept. So one of the first thing you'll want to do when you make a charge game is to define your actions, right? So instead of skills, charge is based around actions. So this isn't something you're good at; it's an action you're good at doing. So this kind of like puts the focus instead of like on nouns, it puts them on verbs, which makes it like I think a bit easier to do actiony stuff. So when I was like
That's
trying to
awesome.
think, when I was trying to think about how like you need to think about the kind of actions the characters are going to be doing a lot in the game. So if the game doesn't focus, for example, like a lot of I don't know, negotiation based like conversation, whatever, well, you don't need to put a negotiating skill in there, right? So I was like, okay, well, I feel like we talked a bit about like this concept was kind of like an anti-matrix kind of thing. So I was like, okay, well, maybe there's going to be like some fights. Maybe there's going to be like some fights between like the cult members and the characters. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to have a fight action. I'm going to have like probably like a pilot action. Maybe there's ships in there inside this quantum realm that people will need to focus. And maybe there's going to be characters that will need to be prominent into piloting ships. So I was like, okay, fight, pilot. Then a next thing, it's an action-based game. If it's a charge game, it's action-based. So I was like, well, if you fight, you might need to evade. So I was like, okay, evade, I've got 3 actions. How far do I want to keep going? In charge, there's 12 actions in total, but you can do it with 9, 6, or 3, but then you just kind of need to change the number of dots you invest in those actions. Other things, because realities are kind of mixed up, I decided to add a discern action, kind of like to discern between reality and what is real, what is not, so characters could kind of feel like have a feel of like instead of like notice or perception or whatever, it's like no, it's discern. How do you discern reality? How do you discern what is true and what is not? I taught about action, convince. Since you're terminals, hackers, coders, I was like, okay, you need to add a troubleshoot action in there. If you're hacking, you need to troubleshoot as well. And yeah, so fight, evade, pilot, discern, act, convince, troubleshoot, shoot, because well, like if we're going anti-matrix, might as well have some guns. And and then I really love the I wanted to make 9 actions and I only had 8. And Lex, I'm gonna steal your quantum action. I think that's perfect. I think it's gonna that's
Cool.
the action I was missing.
Hell yeah.
The other things that the differentiate characters in charge are the details. So a bit like fate aspects. Details are like things that are true to characters. So they give narrative permission as to what characters can do, and it will affect their narrative positioning. So when you do an action, if you have a detail, that's how I call them. If you have a detail that says, I've been a troubleshooter for 25 years. Well, if you're troubleshooting something, you're probably going to be good at it, so you're going to have a better effect on that role. So still haven't taken the time to take like to define some details to the characters because I had some trouble defining what the characters would be doing. So if you have any like opinions in the chat or whatever, or if you two have ideas about how characters could be defined, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, maybe there's sort of like a, because if it's very action heavy, you want to lean into the strength of the system. So you would want the characters to be occupying a role that's very, very like almost like task strike force type of
Yeah.
thing, like spec ops type of situation where these are not like ordinary people living in the world, but they're like high level elite troubleshooters who go in and take care of big problems. I'm thinking kind of like um, sort of like in Lancer, where they're like, even at a level, license level 0 Lancer character is a better pilot than 99% of people out there, right? So maybe in this case, to lean into that strength, perhaps these are like uh, very elite sort of um, troubleshooters. And in the case of this, like sort of like virus or cult, maybe there's additional um, narrative elements surrounding theming, which is another thing that we could probably spend hours talking about. Of like what is the state of the, because like I could see the setting being like, oh, actually there's a tyrannical government and that's why people are trying to escape. And there, maybe people are being given false hope. Maybe the real reality is real, and the government doesn't want you to like, believe in that. And so maybe there's like an internal struggle for the characters. Because I know, like, we think about action movies as very like one note, but it's always fun to have more like our role play tools to play with. So maybe something even like, does your character's factions? Factions are always a great way to like add some texture to a game, and a game like a setting like this would definitely have lots of factions. So perhaps
Oh yeah.
the characters are in favor of the government and what they're doing to stop these cultists. Maybe the characters feel like it's a government overreach, and maybe there's themes about religious freedom. Maybe there's themes. I know I'm getting this is sort of. I'm not right wing at all. This is sounding really strange coming
No,
from.
but
But
No,
like
no.
something like that,
So real
like
quick, you were mentioning like, oh, there's not usually a lot of depth in action movies, but when you think about that aspect of it, that's super duper common in action movies. Like, the mercenary who's killed 100,000 babies now like sees the evil of killing all the babies.
right,
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like I don't know what the opposite of a heel turn is, but that is like a common trope in action movies where you have the
right,
bad people wake up to the truth.
yeah,
You,
definitely.
you know what I mean? Like wait a minute, I'm the bad guy. I'm working for the bad guy, kind of thing. Um you were mentioning different character types for Charge. I think with the way everything's merged and kind of the gonzo sci-fi concept, what would be interesting is if instead of like party roles or tactical roles, like would be typical with like Powered by the Apocalypse or a D&D hack, if the playbooks or the classes were based on the way they approach it.
mm. Sort of like
You
bringing in
know,
some lumen.
yeah. So, like, are you the aggressive soldier, which in another game might be the striker or like the frontline fighter,
Mhm.
but in this it might be defined by like aggression.
Yeah.
Um,
Ooh.
aggression. Or are you sort of the rationalist? Then they could have drawbacks too. Like if you're the aggressive one, you might be prone to just rush into things. If you're the rationalist or the tactician, you might be prone to like hesitate over much. Just kind of
So
going off of that dichotomy.
I really like this because like one way you can describe details is to add like flavor. Like we mentioned role, we mentioned factions, and I feel like now we're talking about flaws, like characters that have flaws. And maybe you talked about viruses. Maybe the viruses are actually adding emphasis on your flaws and are making them
Ooh.
worse, right? So one thing I was trying to think, so like you mentioned, like Charge relies a lot on clocks, either on the character sheets or during play, and characters have projects and complications. So projects are things that the characters work on resolving, and complications are things that are happening to them. Maybe factions are working against them, and their reputation is going bad. But one type of complication I thought about is, because we talked about viruses, I thought about corruption. So having a
Mhm.
corruption clock that eventually fills up, and I feel like this corruption clock, when it fills up, it's going to change your flaw, or it's going to make it worse, right? So, or it's going to make it harder for you to discern what is real and what is not. The last thing I thought about hacking charge for this would be to rename momentum to control. Like, I feel like it's like to like you're gaining control back on the not the fiction, but like on the
world.
The world, yeah. So a little bit of a renaming there, but I think it adds a bit of flavor. So that's basically what I add in terms of a character concept for this.
That's really cool, because when Rev was talking about like a hacker who waits, obviously waiting is not exactly a big thing in charge. But if you have control, then you have like a patient hacker who is able to gain this resource of control by acting a certain way. And so that's a cool, like, just for everybody. Like, you don't have to take an SRD at face value. You can chop it all up. I know I don't care. I'm sure these
Steal
people.
all our ideas.
Yeah,
I mean, like, Motif is entirely modular. You can take Motif and use it as a story engine with a completely unrelated role-playing game. You can, a lot of, like, the add-ons, like, I don't know if you guys have seen, like, the mystery add-on, for example. Short version is, like, you can run mysteries without having to write a mystery.
That's really useful, and I'm definitely gonna go check that out, because
So, since we're having a game design discussion, like, hey, everybody, steal this. So basically, what happens is when you have investigation scenes and you have successful investigation rolls or interrogations, you can make a random roll to see how valuable was that information for the case you're trying to solve. And we'll call that clue points. It gives you clue points. And then for each stage of a mystery, a mystery could have one stage if it's simple, like who took Mrs. Johnson's cat. Or it could have multiple stages if it's a larger thing, like there's a conspiracy, like who's really controlling the governor, sort of thing. But basically, yeah, so even when you have your successful investigations, there's a little bit of variation in how much clue points you get. And then once you get enough clue points to finish a stage, then the players themselves take the information they have and the things they experienced, and they come up with a theory. And then you roll to see how true that theory is.
Ooh.
Did they nail it? Or is it not quite right? They need more evidence to close out the mystery. And so that's sort of the basic, the simplified overview of it. But you can take that approach and apply it to almost anything that's open-ended or mysterious. Oops, excuse me. Within a role-playing game, and you don't have to pre-plan it. As long as you have a general idea and outline of your world, and then everything's player directed, but it doesn't just feel like you're just like the players are just getting it. It's not like the players just go, well, this is obviously the solution, and there's no tension. Because your investigation, has variable amounts of how far you progress, and when you make your theory, it could be wrong, even if it fits all the evidence rationally out of character. Obviously, you're missing some parts, so you have to go explore another thing. And then you can throw in something where if there's a dead end, you can get people out of the dead end.
Nice. Yeah.
Like leaning into genre tropes, like, oh, you think about like film noir, the hard-boiled detective, and he hits a dead end. Oh, that witness was dead. And then, some shadowy guy or some drunk is like, oh, hey, there's that other guy.
Yeah, nobody likes a dead end, so having those triggers basically happening even when things go sour is like so good.
Yeah, and so it's a bit more like a lot of mystery systems in RPGs are very procedural based. It's more like CSI than like say Agatha Christie. Because even Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes hit certain dead ends and had to like backtrack or re-examine some evidence, and So that's just the way to open that flow. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but
No,
it's
that's
just perfect
cool.
for the.
Yeah, for sure. And so one thing that RP said that I think will lead nicely into Rev's take on this hyperreality idea is the idea of corruption clock. And like in Motif, there's a corruption sort of mechanic in there, which I'll let Rev explain. And perhaps I don't know if that'll feature prominently in your read of this idea, but
Really, that's the thing about a lot of motif add-ons is it is both the compliment and criticism I think I receive most often is that you don't really need the books in the end because it leans into like sort of cultural knowledge, like the genre awareness, the trope awareness,
Mhm.
but also it's sort of like when I look at building motif things, motif itself is simple, but it produces interesting results. It's just some d6 you throw and it tells you crazy answers. But so I just sort of look at what I want to do. So like with the mysteries, I was like, what do I want to do when I'm soloing and I want mysteries?
Mhm.
Or we're going GM-less, And so it's
Right.
just like, well, you want that uncertainty, you want that thrill of like, oh man,
Discovery.
yeah, exactly. And so that's just what I just sort of went with the simplest approach for that.
I think that's
And then for
perfect.
corruption and temptation, it's really the same way. Like you just have a track for temptation. It can vary by your setting now. Like I should talk about my quantum web idea here. Hyperreality
Yeah.
is with the computer virus, like your code, so to speak, starts getting corrupted. And so how the temptation in the base motif, there's temptation and corruption. And temptation is just that, how tempted you are, how much you've been poked by the darkness or the devil or the computer viruses, whatever the individual corruption factor is. And then corruption is how permanently corrupted you're getting. And then usually in most motif builds, if you hit a certain mark, like 5 or 7 usually, that is sort of the auto retire button. Like you've
Mhm.
just gone too far over the edge. Um, and it could be anything from like moral corruption, like if you're playing like an occult horror kind of setting. If you're looking at like cyberpunk or dystopian or like post-apocalyptic type of setting, instability, loss of identity are big examples of what corruption could be. So in hyper reality, yeah, I think of corruption as the computer virus sort of infecting you. As you confront it and work with it, whether you're approaching it sort of as a programmer or you're going for the more action-based approach, you're coming into contact with the tendrils of the virus. Um, because you are this class of troubleshooters, somebody that they awoke from hibernation to be like, please help us. You are resistant to it, and so that's why you have a track.
Mhm.
And so I think my temptation track would be an error track. The some read write errors, so to speak, that
Ooh.
you're accumulating, mild corruption level, and as your errors go up, you have a chance to need to re-roll good rolls.
Ooh.
You know,
So
you, you,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
really
you know,
cool.
like a glitch happens. Like you're doing it and you're about to like. So again, like it could even be an action scene. You're swinging the sword, you're swinging a sword, and it's about to come down, and then there's just like a little glitch of static,
Mm.
and then you make the re-roll to see if you actually um carry through or if you error out.
Or like a buffer, like with like internet, it's like, or you play games online and it's like, I definitely hit that person, and then it stutters and like they're not there
Yeah,
And then,
anymore.
that's
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. It's just completely different. There's somebody else completely different stabbing you in the kidneys. Then, and then the permanent track. I'm just going to straightforward call infection. It's a viral infection. And the higher your infection is, the more you are able to ignore things in the world, but the less you're able to affect the world.
Ooh, that's a
So, like,
cool.
unlike the regular cultists, so to speak, or the regular victims of the virus, who do and can cause riots or just social dissolution and chaos, because you're this troubleshooter type of character, your connection to the quantum web is kind of, in my concept of it, part of what makes you who you are. Sort of like the classic mythic concept of I am this place is me, or like a lot of the Irish heroes, like, my blood is tied to this, so, my blood
Mm,
is tied to these mountains, to this air, to this world that we live in, or even like a lot of more shamanistic sort of views of reality and stuff, where yeah, that tree is me and I am that tree.
mm,
So like I mentioned, like sort of some dystopian and cyberpunk settings, loss of identity, and that's why it was in my head, because this was the idea that I had, that you lose yourself as the virus infects you. Again, you're more resistant, but in a way it's kind of more horrible for you.
right.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this is, and this is another topic I was thinking of getting to earlier. Character death, or what consequences, like the sort of like what is the heaviest consequence in your game, and in sort of like the traditional D&D method, it's like your character dies, you're at 0 hit points, you've got 3 death saves, they're dead. Maybe you can get a resurrection spell off, but this is how you die, and death is sort of like the main consequence that you're trying to avoid in traditional D&D type games. But if you don't have hit points in your games, which a lot of games don't, this could be one of those things where like, and this is where like the clocks come in, where the clocks are filling up, and then your character is unavailable for the scene, or both of y'all systems have better, more robust ways of dealing with it than mine does. So if you want to like touch on that idea, please go ahead.
I encourage you to go ahead and steal my default ID. My default is uh again, like I said, I just kind of look at things, and with motif, a big part of it is how do I want it to just be kind of common sense and simple, looking at it as sort of a storytelling game. Um, and so I go with storytelling conditions. I call them with capital C, but conditions. So
Yeah.
most of the games I write, they all use conditions, and you can have different levels of caps on them depending on, or different levels to them depending on what the scale of your game is. But all they are is simple narrative tags. Do you get shot? You have a gunshot wound. Do you fall and break your leg? You have a broken leg. And they
That's
do what
so
they
powerful, right? Because once you've got those tags, like the entire party can look at those tags and say, like, you're trying to run. Sorry, that's not gonna work. It's
Right.
impossible. You've got a broken leg, right? Like once it's established in the fiction, like that's why narrative games are so powerful. It's because you don't need to simulate every single thing with like hit points and whatnot and like bloody type of mechanics, right?
Yeah, so I love narrative conditions. I've imposed narrative conditions on other games. It makes it easier for me, at least, both a player and a GM, to conceptualize and track injuries. You know, a random X number of points out of a Y pool doesn't register for me. But looking at my sheet and being like, oh man, I've got 2 major injuries. I've got a broken leg and a gunshot wound. I can only hold 3, so if I get one more, I'm at least I'm going down.
Yep.
And then I'm at the mercy of these jerks. So I'm gonna limp away and hide behind this container crate over here.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
uh, but also sort of like there's a lot of questions in a lot of role playing games, like, oh, how long does this take to heal, or how, when you're thinking about hit points or health, even health levels, which are a simpler version. Yeah, how long does it take to heal? But if you look at something like a deep cut or a broken arm or something, like like a broken bone, it's going to take a month or two to heal up. On a everyday real world default, it's very intuitive for most injuries. How well can they heal? How fast can they heal?
Yeah.
Just wanted to say the chat is on fire. There's so many comments, and one of them actually I think is really really interesting because it plays very well with your idea, Lex, about like having like a X scroll kind of game with Contrib Core, and it's Kata Creations who says that like you could have like a notoriety clock that the more you fail, the more you're noticed as a problem. And this is where, like in my head, I see the virus trying to take on your territory that you could have conquered in the past, but now you have to defend. You cannot always attack because you're getting noticed. You're getting fight back.
That's really cool. Yeah, hell yeah, I love that.
Catching up on reading the chat at the moment.
Yeah, RP, while I catch up on chat, do you want to talk about how like your system handles not necessarily hit points, but that sort of idea of like the clocks and like what the stakes are, what the consequences are for failure?
Right. So for charge in general, like failing doesn't always mean that you're gonna get hit, right? Like when you receive a consequence, it could simply be like a narrative consequence, or it can be that like there's something in the fiction that eventually is gonna happen and is gonna be problematic, which you can use danger clocks for this. So danger clocks are kind of things that you put into gameplay and say, hey, you're getting noticed within this particular complex, so like I'm going to put a danger clock in the more you fail, instead of just saying you take stress or you take a condition or whatever. You're like, no, I'm going to raise the tension in the fiction, and players can actually take this and say, actually, could I raise the tension in the scene for a bonus die? So they can kind of like gamble with the GM and say, I want to make this scene more complicated for everyone because I really want to succeed at this action. So there's this kind of like a weird economy of players wanting, like they're making things worse, but that's okay. And the other thing, lastly, is that you can get hurt. You can worsen your condition, and when that happens, you take stress. So like in charge, default charge, characters have like this stress clock, which eventually gets filled, and the more it gets filled, this clock is linked to a detail, so kind of like a character aspect. So every time it gets filled, you're like, okay, kind of like the narrative talk that you were talking, Rev, like your clock gets filled, so I'm at 2 segments now. I need to update my condition, and my condition is like, I've got a broken leg, or I cannot see right anymore because there's a virus in my eyes or whatever. So you update your condition as things get worse, and when it gets filled, then you're taken out. And what does taken out mean? Well, I guess it depends on the game. And this is why I was talking about like the corruption clock a bit earlier, is that this is kind of like another way the GM can use the mechanics as a pacing mechanism, because it's only that, right? Like when you play a game, like when you've got HP, when you've got clocks, it's only a pacing mechanisms to raise the tension in the scene. So like if things go wrong, the GM increases the tension by just saying, this particular pacing mechanism, I'm going to increase it because things are about to get worse. So you could use corruption as another way to like make things worse, and then eventually this could affect your character permanently. So you could like rename one of your core content and say, I was this type of character, but now I'm partially broken because I'm trying to fight this corruption and it's affecting me. Kind of like you've seen this in like the One Ring RPG, for example, which has like this shadow corruption track, or you've got like the same kind of concept in Fate of Cthulhu as well. So I think this would play really well in this. So you've got your physical condition, but you also have your physical corruption that could affect your character.
I love this because it also touches on a very I'm pretty new to game design, so like that first moment when you realize like, oh, hit points are just one way of tracking like stakes or tracking pressure on the narrative. You don't have to die for there to be stakes, right? You care about the outcome of it. Could, if you're doing a heist game, obviously there's very high stakes there. If you're just running a cafe, if you're doing like a cafe sim RPG, the stakes are there's still stakes where it's like you probably wouldn't use hit points in a cafe sim. You would use like profit and loss, or you would use reviews, like star reputation. Yeah, exactly. And so like when you when you screw up, your reputation goes down. You lose business. You feel bad. You care about this place, right? Like it. That's a really
Powered by
cool.
the Apocalypse actually has a good mechanic for that with RX relationships. Your relationship tracks.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I
I don't know if you've played a lot of PBTA
I've
games or
played
not.
Monster of the Week mostly,
Okay,
and
so
then
I mean,
yeah.
that does have the relationships in it, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, you could do like in a cafe game like relationship tracks, or
Right.
like you could have individual relationship tracks where you have like your allies and contacts, so to speak, in the cafe scene, and
Mm.
then you could have like faction tracks for tracking clicks.
Yeah.
Like oh the tech hipsters over there, you know, like you could have like the tech
Right.
hipsters and like the artists and like, you know, the
Oh,
middle class moms who come out to the cafe, and like, you know, they're each different, just like in real life, like different social circles.
right.
And so I'm just thinking like a cafe sim, that's where I would go with that, is track some individual relationships so you have
Hmm.
that little bit of granularity and
Right.
uh
So one of the chat is saying that like getting
verisimilitude, you
fired.
know, the feeling that it's sort of realistic. But
Uh-huh.
then, yeah, like the broader game is sort of tracking, like, and you use those individual people to sort of, like, if you're running, like, if you're the people running the cafe, my concept would be like you have to like keep them all sort of balanced, because as you please certain cliques, you're gonna displease other ones, or as you make friends
Yeah.
with certain people, other people will, you know, go down. And so you kind of got to keep it all even so that you can keep the cafe filled.
Yeah. I also you could even like I love that and like it's so funny because like we were thinking about like our first concept that we're still gonna keep talking about, but like the hyper
Yes.
reality versus this cafe sim where we're it's the same like tools, right? It's the same pieces that we're playing with the same knobs, but they're very different tonally and very different like gameplay wise. And I think it's like you could even do like supply chain stuff or like oh maybe you get exclusive rights to this pastry chef and you get to like sell their pastries in your little like glass case and the other coffee shops in town don't get to sell them and like this increases your this is a huge advantage and that's like those are real stakes and those are and when you're in the game like you are going to be caring about that and essentially I think saw someone in the chat say like getting fired as a lost state
Yeah.
and so like you can talk about it as like a lost state and essentially what hit points track is like how long do you have left until you can no longer influence the story, right? Or at least uh, this fight, right? Like in D&D, it's like you get down to 0 hit points, you can no longer affect the flow of the battle because you're unconscious and you got to do your death saves. But if you can you can replace hit points with almost anything else, right? It's like happy customers or your reviews online. These are all sorts of things that you can do in Nighthawks, which is my Caltrip core game. That my first one. There's an isolation die. Everybody has an isolation die. It's a D4 starts at 2, or you can roll it and start randomly somewhere. This sort of represents your ability to reach out and break out of your isolation. And when you tick down to 0, you don't die because like the stakes of the game aren't like physical, like health stakes, but emotional stakes, right? Like you are no longer, when you hit 0, you are no longer able to reach out to other people and attempt to break out of your isolation. So for that one scene, you can't use the reach out to another character action. And so it sort of restricts your narrative options. Although, but then there's other ways that other characters can they can either reach out to you to grant you access back to that action, or you can somehow try to get your isolation die back up to 1, 2, 3, or 4 with other mechanics in the games. And that is essentially the same as hit points, but it has a very different storytelling like use, right? We're talking about a game that is about breaking out of isolation. And so when your tools to do that are reduced, you are really losing. You know, if you can lose a role playing game, you're really like on your back foot trying to connect with other people. And so there's all these like there's corruption, there's all these cool like you can use a die, you can use a clock, all these sorts of things to really all you're doing is adding stakes. Right? What happens when you fail?
Oh yeah, yeah. Or a lot of times, sometimes I don't even like thinking of it as stakes
Mhm.
or gambling, a risk of sort of. but sort of it's it's like the appeal of movies with twists. You know, like the uncertainty, the thrill of what's going to happen next. And that's something I do emphasize in some of the writings about motif and in the books. Some of the books is that this is about introducing the thrill of uncertainty, like default. We lost RP there. Oh, welcome back, RP.
All good. Sometimes I lose a camera, so I just need to reset. Sorry, didn't
No,
mean
it
to-
just happens sometimes. It's Discord. It's actually been stable. Let me
It's been
knock
great so
on
far.
wood here. But like motif, I mean, super default advice that I emphasize all the time is only roll when it's uncertain and it's interesting.
Yeah. Like you
and
don't need to roll to know if you can open a door.
yeah. Like, or if it's just not interesting, then why are you wasting focus time and table time on rolling and interpreting results? Just either it does or it doesn't. Maybe throw in a yes but to add something interesting, but just move on. If it's not interesting, it's not interesting.
It's funny because in Charge, if you roll for useless things, you're going to break the whole economy of the game. And that's something I've mentioned in the Fari Discord, because if you roll for useless things, you're going to generate momentum. And momentum can be spent for bonuses. So if you're like, I'm making perception checks every time I'm entering a room, it's like, yeah, you gain 2 bonus points and 2 bonus points that you're going to be able to spend later. It's like, no, don't do that. That's not how it works. You roll when there's a risk. You don't roll just to see if you can look out the window.
Yeah.
And I like the different triggers for rolling across the 3 SRDs. Like they each sort of look at the same thing. Like I say, only roll when it's interesting and uncertain. And RP says only roll when there's risk. You know what I mean? And I think that's something I want to highlight, because that is like a key point of game design that sort of gets talked about in specific mechanics, but as sort of an overriding principle. That is often the difference between the impression of what's an engaging system, even if it's flawed, versus what's sort of like meh. Like, people have that very bland or even a hostile reaction to it, is when or even when they do like it, it's sort of like with the big game, people roll for everything, like you were saying, RP. You know what I mean? And
well, there's also the fact that rolling is fun, right? Like I've had some friends who just told me, like, I love rolling dice. Can I just roll some dice? Like, okay, fine, just rolling.
That's sort of like a it's just a different way of looking at it. Like, why are you rolling? Is essentially like an important question to ask. Are you rolling because rolling is fun? Well, then you want a lot. You want to make your system so there's going to be tons of rolls all the time. Lean into that. Is there risk? Is it an interesting question? Have we come to sort of like a door, so like a narrative door? Like, ooh, what's behind door number 1?
Yeah.
Like, what are you going for? And is a good question to ask with that approach, because it'll guide so much of your game design.
Well, if you're making a culture core game that's based on like tokens, you cannot generate like if you gain tokens or spend tokens by rolling, then the number of times that you're going to roll is going to affect this entire economy and can affect the game. So it's pretty important thing to take in consideration. How many times people will roll? How many times do you want to rely on luck?
Yeah, I think the thing that what's fun about rolling is what Rev said, is like the uncertainty of it, the thrill of seeing what's going to happen. And so I think there's, and my first TTRPG was 5e, D&D 5e. So and that's like a very widely, people know that system. And coming from that side, and the way people roll dice in that system versus probably more narrative focused systems, is like it's fun when you play with people who are like still like trying new indie TTRPGs, and their D&D was like there is like mainly what they've played before, and they like ask the GM like, do I see this thing or does this happen? It's like when I'm running a Couch Up Core game, it's like you tell me, you roll the dice, we see the result, you tell me what happens.
Yeah,
Keep in mind what the result is. It's like all right, you get what you want, and so like for Couch Up Core, I encourage people you only roll dice when you can say like an I want statement because otherwise there's really no like the result on the table is not going to make sense unless you want something. It's like I want to see if I see what do I see? If you roll a 3, it's like you get what you want, but things get more complicated. That doesn't work. But it's like I'm looking for a key to open this door. I want to find a key for this door. You roll a 3. It's like yes, you find the key. It's in the mouth of a monster with big sharp teeth and fangs, and now you gotta go grab the key, right? And so you can see how that provides texture, and the moments that you identify for rolling, and then it's like resolution mechanics. What are you exactly rolling to decide, or what you could have? You can draw cards. There's card drawing resolution mechanics. There's dice lists. There's Dread has the Jenga tower, which I have never played or looked into, but it seems awesome to have a Jenga
amazing.
Tower. And like when things fall down, it's like very clearly you lost because the whole tower comes crumbling down. And so it's all depends on like where, like Rev said, where are you putting the focus, where are you putting the screen time on for these roles. Sometimes things can just happen, and one thing that I would really recommend people read is Wanderhome because if you play Wanderhome, you realize like, oh, I actually don't need to roll often for anything. And in fact, Wanderhome doesn't have dice; it just has tokens that you gain from seemingly insignificant things, but because you get tokens from it, that's the system telling you these moments are significant. Like these are important things that we're rewarding. So it's like there's stuff where it's like gain a token whenever you stop and listen to the wind, stuff like that, where like in D&D like would never happen. But I think when you're writing a game and choosing a system for writing a game, you want to consider what is the economy of like not just actions and stuff like that, but like what is like tokens make a lot of sense to me because it is like it's a very clear economic trade in the system itself that tells you what's valuable and what costs resources, right? So you could do that in any of these games and any of these systems as well, where the game writer is telling you this is what's important and this is what's valuable and like here's the theme, right, of what's going on. In Nighthawks, you don't start with any tokens, but you can gain tokens by attempting to reach out to someone. That's me, rewarding the players for reaching out to people. So what am I saying about isolation? I'm saying it's worth it to try and break out of your isolation. It's sort of the thesis of your game can be expressed mechanically. And RP has a great thing when he was talking about charge, where it's like the system rewards you for taking action. So like you want to try because you're going to get momentum, you're going to get all this cool stuff, and like that's a really cool thing that is I don't see a lot of people talk about because it's hard to talk about on Twitter. It's like this very complicated idea of what like I think of mechanics.
It's very
and things,
push. Yeah, like, and that's it's charge. You're charging forward.
Yeah. What are your mechanics saying about like I think of them as a thesis. I think of mechanics as not necessarily always, but like can express a thesis based on what you write.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's
so speaking of mechanics, we should we're having a great discussion, but we should at least do our quick build here.
Yeah.
What I've got here for my concept is that there's 3 basic types of characters. There's for my troubleshooters, and there's founders, which are people who remember being flesh and blood human beings who remember being jacked into the quantum web when it first launched. And then there are engineers which are AI program explicitly, like some of the only characters that are actually clear, both of these types of characters are clear. Like one is a human jacked in, one is an AI. Engineers are AIs created by some of the original architects of the system. And part of the fun of them is, like founders have a much bigger perspective on things than other characters do. Engineers have a real purpose. They are hard coded into the web. The question, what's interesting about them is your question is, what is my purpose? Because you've been in hibernation, so you don't entirely remember. Whereas for the founder, it is, what is my purpose now? I was one of the founders, but now I've been waking up, heavens knows how much later in the evolution of the system, and what's my purpose now? And the third type of person is called a glitch, which is unknown whether it's an AI or a human. But a glitch is someone in the quantum web that just has access to loopholes. They get to ignore some of the rules. And in that, my conception on it is that they literally get to ignore some of the game rules sometimes.
That's so fun.
And so, their question is just a very simple, like a very existential, what is my purpose? Because like both, for the sake of, I'm thinking like, oh, how are they going to cooperate if that's a glitch? So, from the perspective of founders and engineers, the quantum web made that quote unquote glitch for a reason. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Hell yeah.
And so, for the core dice, I have two basic variations of motif that I use most often, and that's usually like a 2 dice system that has just an answer and a wrinkle, so a yes, no, and and or but. And that could be fun for like really wild gonzo adventures. You get a lot of variation in answers. And the other version is the 3 dice system, which one of you guys mentioned earlier, where the first die is your yes no, the second one is the degree of answer, from 1 to 6, and then the third die is a flavor. Flavors are plug and play factors. They're just another factor or element of the answer, just like the straight yes or no or the strength of the answer. So it could be weirdness. How weird are how weird is the answer, or how weird are things getting in around the answer, or it could be favorability. How favorable is it to the player characters, or it could be if you're doing it as an action roll, advantage disadvantage. Like, yeah, you get a really strong win. You get double 6s on the first 2 dice, a hard yes, as strong of a yes as you could possibly get. But you could roll a 1 on advantage disadvantage using that as a flavor. And so it kind of emulates those sort of cinematic moments where you make a big blow, but then you kind of stumble afterward, or like one of their guardsmen shoves you out of the way after you stab him.
It's like one of those moments. Sorry, go ahead, Lex.
No, go ahead. I've been talking. I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, it's just I want to say, like, it's like one of those moments in movies where the main characters are doing something very cool, and then like you hear a sound or a stinger, and then you just see like the main character's face that just clearly says, okay, what now? Like, what is about to happen? Something's about to go wrong, and disadvantage mechanic, I think, could really work well for those kind of like, oh no moments.
I was thinking like, okay, the player takes down a very tough enemy. It was in a slog. It's like one of those, brawls in movies where it's just like it's a war of attrition and the hero's victorious, and then the one is the camera pans behind the hero. There's three more of this type of enemy coming. You're like, oh crap, I got to get out of here. You won, but it's bad. And so if y'all are interested in that sort of like, see how we all interpreted like a similar setup of dice. Check out definitely check out Motif. It's got a lot of cool things like that where it is feels like an oracle. It's like, oh, I see the dice and like what am I gonna how am I gonna interpret this to move the story forward and have a fun, cool next beat of the story.
So for
It's a really
this
cool thing.
concept, I think I'm going to go with the 3 dice system, actually.
Ooh.
The Gonzo feel would be kind of nice, but I think I want something a little bit more structured, because in my head, all 3 types of characters, they can't really fail at the things that they can do, that they're good at, you know? Like, there's just no failure for them. So the first die is going to just get sort of shifted over. I'm going to make that my strength of success, my degree of success. You know, you roll a 1, it takes forever. It's sort of a lazy kludge job. A 6, it's like, you just made a masterpiece, or just crack it in a second. The second die, I'm going to make cost. Everything costs. So if you roll a 1, there's not really any cost besides just sort of the time that you spent, or tools you used, or so on. But if you use a 6, like, yeah, you might have disabled that security system, but not before you got electrocuted a little bit. That kind of thing, And then for the third die with the flavors, I'm going to default to weirdness, chaos,
Yes.
and advantage, disadvantage, as the 3 recommended like default flavors, because we're dealing with sort of both a weird world,
Very.
where people can recode the world around them, and it's quantum. It could be 2 things at once, perhaps even. And we're talking about the spread of the virus and everything, and you being awoken from hibernation to a later iteration of the web. So chaos is just a fitting thing,
Right.
and because chaos can be just as interpreted what's chaotic to the player characters. It doesn't necessarily mean everything's going nuts in a
Right.
riot.
Yeah.
It could just be an incoherent shouting of conflicting details, and then for advantage, disadvantage, it's just sort of nice because you are doing troubleshooting, you are trying to solve situations, and so I think it's sort of a good simpler element to introduce, where weirdness or chaos wouldn't be as fitting. Like a nice default to fall back on. So that's where I'm going with my base my base character types and core loop there.
Hell yeah.
So I'll pass it on to one of you guys to.
RP, you want to go?
Oh, well, I just wanted to say it's like kind of like a side note, but it's funny because it feels like our different systems approaches kind of like all take a different pace on the game, and it feels almost like they could all be applied to the same game, but depending on how close you are in the fiction. Like, for example, if you're at the very top level, like maybe you want to manage all the faction management and like how like territory management, all of that, like with culture up, and then when there's an action scene, you switch to charge, and then when there's an investigation kind of phase and whatever, bring back the motif oracle or whatever. Like I can definitely see something like that. That could be very, very fun.
We got to do that bundle. We got to do this and make a bundle, and then connect it into one singular game.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Do you have an idea for like? Did you want to add any more depth to your how you would like? What are your next steps for the system for this idea?
Yeah, like how are you going about like the basic core mechanic and You mentioned your stats, but like, are you doing playbooks or classes or different character types, or are you kind of going for a specific character type that can specialize?
I thought about this. So by default, Charge doesn't have playbooks. It has like a generic talent tree because by default, Charge was a generic game for my group, right?
Mhm.
So with this talent tree, you every time there's like a story milestone, you invest a talent dot, and you can either get like better at your usual actions, or you can get better under specific circumstances, like get a boost in effect or in position. And when that happens, like I thought about playbooks, but I didn't get any ideas on this, so I wasn't necessarily sure how I would handle this. One thing that I think could be interesting is instead of having playbooks, you could have different talent trees you could pick from. So instead of saying I'm going to choose this class or whatever, you start your character and you don't really, because I think so many games ask you to define who your character is at the beginning. Like you have your sheet of paper and it's like, okay, who is your character? It's like, I don't even know, I haven't played them yet,
Mhm.
so I'm not sure. So I think that one thing I'd like to try with this is just to have like a talent tree that you decide later in the game. It's like, I'm going to play my character first, get the feeling of who they are, and then say, okay, I think I'm going to choose this talent tree and invest in this. Kind of like I've told you all about I was playing a bit of Borderlands recently, and there's like 3 different talents tree that you can invest in. I think I'd like to try an approach similar to this, to just say, okay, I know my character is now, and I'm going to go down this way and specialize in that way. So instead of having playbooks, you just like, you have talents and you invest in them, and they're kind of like pre-filled instead of just being very generic.
Gotcha.
Um, and another thing that I'd like to add, and that's more like, it's more flavor than mechanics. So charges like world forces. So they're kind of like organizations that you define in the world, and they have like separate goals. And I think that one thing that I'd like to, if I were making it, well, of course I'm going to make a game out of this. Like we've been talking about it for two for 2 hours, but I think that I would have world forces for this game. Like world forces are basically things that exist in the world, and they have goals and they have methods. So, for example, the virus could be a world force. It's a force that has an impact in the world, and its main goal is to probably corrupt the entire verse. And
Mhm.
the way it's going to do that is, yeah, it's going to corrupt people. Maybe it's going to transform them and build an army out of it or whatever. And those defining those world forces adds a bit of flavor to the game in a way that doesn't take up a lot of space. You don't need to define, for example, like 50 pages of lore in your game. You just define a couple of world forces, like this thing exists, here's its goal, here's how it is trying to get to this goal. So that, yeah, so I'd probably do something like that, among other things. But yeah, that'd be basically it, how I would approach this setting. How about
Nice.
you, Lex?
I so because once you get to like 4D4 and 5D4 in Caltrip Core, the for the people who were here earlier, the chances of failure become negligible as you have reached that scale, which is not that high of a stat. Like it's like basically 1 through 3. So you're like 1, 2, or 3 in a set to keep it interesting, which also means your level of customization is a little more limited because the system is so lightweight. It fails at create at like, or it doesn't fail, but it's harder to make a character creation that is like sort of like even the level of D&D 5e, which a lot of people say is not customizable enough. Couch Core is even harder to do something like that. However, I think I've been finding myself drawn to more of the token side of Caltrip Core, and so with the tokens is you do certain actions, you gain tokens, and then you can spend tokens to roll the d4s. And how many ever tokens you spend is how many ever d4s that you roll, and you'll take the highest one to see what happens. And I think that actually it kind of gives like you the player get to make decisions that are really interesting, and then you have some sort of strategy around how you want to use your tokens. I think what would be really cool is in the system is so like also not doing traditional classes or playbooks because it's really all I've been able to figure out is like, okay, well, you roll these two stats together, sort of like World of Darkness, roll these two stats together. The number of fours you get is how much damage you deal on this magic attack or whatever, which is totally fine. And I have like, examples of that in my book. What I would find interesting for this type of thing is sort of at the high level, you would have definitely token-based play, where you're sort of like making deals with local politicians or local factions, sort of doing a lot of that faction management, and you would gain tokens in order to do stuff. And then maybe you can spend tokens to affect the politics die that I mentioned earlier. That, that die, you'll roll it and it'll affect how the next mission goes. Well, if you spend tokens and maybe you get a 4, then you can sort of adjust that politics die in a direction to your favor. Maybe something like that. And then on the more like micro level of the player or like the character level, this can be either like a downside of Caltro Core or an upside depending on how you like to design. Making individual tables for different types of moves, which is sort of how I've been doing when I'm doing I've been working on a couple like tactical combat type games. It can get really tedious in Caltro Core because essentially for each move you create a different table. But I find it actually really fun to tinker with little things like that and have little moves. So for example, if you want to get really nitty gritty, melee attacks on a 1, you take 1 damage. On a 2, you deal 1 damage. On a 3, you deal 2 damage, and on a 4, you deal 3 damage. That's like a very easy melee table to use. But if you want to do ranged, it really doesn't make sense for you to take damage on a failure, right? It's sort of it doesn't make sense in the narrative. You can either have the 1 not deal any damage. You could also have the 1 deal damage to an ally, right? And there's you had an abject failure, you missed, and you hit someone that is working with you, and then you kind of do it from there, and maybe you cap out the damage a little lower. So I'm thinking for this type of game, I was really inspired. When Rev was kind of like pitching this concept to us, I thought of Transistor, the video game by Supergiant Games. Shout out! I don't know, I love their games. And so I'm thinking of the Transistor Sword, where you sort of plug in different nodes in order to do different abilities, and that sort of becomes your core 4 abilities whenever you're roaming the world. And you can even drop in other abilities to modify those. So perhaps there's maybe you just have a pick list of cool abilities, and they each have a specific table, and you can spend tokens to roll that ability. And what happens is what happens. And so if you want a character that is very good at hacking, you'll take, maybe there's a hack skill where it's, it follows the general structure of Caltro Core of a 1, you don't get what you want, things get a lot worse. 2, you don't get what you want. 3, you get what you want, complication. 4, you get what you want and more. And you can sort of build the skills based on that scale. And then you can also tinker with it and really I have a couple abilities and games I'm working on now where you only get something on a 4, right? But it's a really great little bonus where on a 4, you actually do something really great. And then on a 3 and lower, nothing happens. So it would be a lot of tinkering and a lot of designing specific abilities that would feel cool in the world. And then perhaps have something like Revs where it's okay, there's different types of people in the world, and that offers other static bonuses or other maybe you get an extra point in your quantum stat because you're a glitch, something like that. Little simple things like that. A lot of the fun in Caltro Core comes from what can I kind of jerry rig together to make something that fits exactly what I want within a little table of 4 disparate results. 4 results is still twice as many as the traditional D20 system, right? Where it's binary pass fail. This is, as simple as a D4 is, there's still the 4
That's part of what I love about Caltrop Core is that it took the simplest die, and I mean, from looking at Motif that I love the elegance of simple systems that have complex results. So, how would you apply the tables to hyper reality? Like what kind of moves or actions are you looking at?
Right. So if we're thinking on a character level, I think it's cool if we have a little bit more action focus, because at the hex level you'd have the more political intrigue style moves, which could be offering a token for a future favor or something like that. But on the character level, I'm thinking you could have I love playing tanks, so like a absorb corruption mechanic where like you're able to heal someone of corruption by taking it on yourself, and perhaps on a 3 up you succeed, but the three is there's a complication, so maybe there's like whatever the hit point mechanic is. I think a corruption mechanic still makes sense in this system as well. So maybe there's like a corruption die, and if you roll a 3, you succeed, but your corruption die ticks up by 1. And when you once it gets to a certain level, then either your character is out for a scene, or maybe even something exciting like, if your table's okay with this, that character turns on the rest of the party, right? Because the corruption has taken up them over so completely that they're not really in control of the actions. And for a lot of tables, that can be fun. I think another mechanic would, you have your hacking, you have like cleanse corruption, you have um, maybe even like an architect style skill where like you can like touch a building in the quantum reality and sort of change the wall, or like almost like an alchemy type of thing of like using the material in that wall to create a barricade or to create a cool new weapon for a party member to use. um, the hyper reality idea I just love so much because it's like magic, but it's also cyber stuff. Like it's just you could do a lot of things. I'm thinking of the hacker as like a rogue slash wizard like combination. I'm thinking maybe there's like the priest, which is also a tank, who is the person who's taking on the corruption, and then maybe like a third like sort of um like damage dealer type of thing where perhaps their focus is really crowd control when they sort of like the viruses and cultists sort of start turning into something that's like largely unmanageable and becomes a little bit more violent. Maybe the vanguard's there to like kind of be the frontliner. And so you kind of have those three RPG roles per se. And what I would do probably is if I did the pick list method, I would also be like, here are 3 potential roles and here are ideas for which abilities to pick. So it would sort of be like playbooks, but more of like a loose, here's some ideas if you just want to pick up and play.
Nice.
Yeah, because playbooks are good at that. They're like, you don't have to think that much. It's like they convey like flavor, like they explain quickly what the setting is about, what kind of characters are going to play in it, and it makes it very, very easy for players to just say, okay, I know what kind of characters I'm going to be. Like they don't need to think as much. So that's why playbooks and classes are so cool in games.
I think playbooks are like a nice modernized version of classes. Like it simplifies things so much. I'm going with splats for this though, because I'm a dirty 90s rat. So, the way I'm treating the 3 types, basically they each get sort of a special, access to a special ability or things they can do that other people can't do or can't do as well. So the founders sort of have like social privilege and access because they're the founders.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter what the security level is on a room or a wing of an area or whatever. They can just walk in there. Nobody's going to stop them, essentially. It's sort of like
access.
like the vice president comes into the lab, you're not going to ask him like, oh, do you have authorization, sir? No, because you don't want to get fired or have Secret Service rough you up or whatever. It's sort of like that kind of concept, The engineers have sort of like a more ground level authority. More like a bureaucrat than a cop.
Yeah.
And they also they have coding access that other people don't. They can alter a more fundamental level of programming. And so it's kind of interesting when you think about it because the founders are sort of almost like brute forcing it.
Yeah, actually it's like it's
like
gentle,
I can just
but brute
walk
force.
into the room where I can push a button, whereas the engineers are sort of like the finesse side of that, I got to do the coding.
See, like the founders, they can deconstruct everything if they wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. So the engineers use a little bit more finesse, though. They use like patches and things, and then glitches have loopholes and hacks. Again, they can just sort of ignore the rules at points. Like,
That is
yeah,
so exciting.
that just sort of doesn't exist. Or like, oh man, a sword. What are you talking about? That's a nice bouquet of flowers you just gave me.
I
And
love those.
and hacks where they can sort of make programs temporarily do things that they wouldn't be otherwise able to do or wouldn't do. Get across firewalls or just be like, oh, I just need this feature for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Oh
really
my God,
cool.
that is like I would want that in real life with like especially Adobe products. Like if I could just look at InDesign and be like, I want this feature for just 5 minutes, I would be so happy.
And that's a really cool
Um,
thing you can do with the dice is like with your like degrees. It's like, all right, this works, but it only
True
works for a
degree.
minute, right? Or,
yep,
that sort of
exactly, yeah.
idea. I
It's the
love
different
that.
variables. It's like knobs that you can turn. Basically, it's like if you have a mixing board, right, and every single roll is basically like tuning up and down different switches.
I love how smooth that
Absolutely.
is too. Like that implementation is just really smooth for the classes where it's not sometimes there's like awkward GM to player where like the GM's like, how do I implement this ability? Where
I
in that case
love
it's like,
my narrative tags, narrative
oh,
tags,
Yeah.
narrative tags,
really
narrative tags.
truly it's like such a smoother, and that's what I admire about both of your systems is that the narrative it flows very smoothly and like the roles don't interrupt that. They sort of like they keep it moving, which is just like so
They're
like
part of it for Motif, definitely, because
yeah.
Motif is an answer engine. It's a world assistant, a GM assistant, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And
Um,
you don't want it to get in the way as well, right? Because the fun part is you don't want the fun part to be interrupted by a mechanic. The mechanic is the
right,
toolbox, right? It's like
and
it
then
gives
Yeah.
it
like
when you need
so,
it to.
like the action mechanics. I have a set of skills here, and you get two of three types of skills. You get two specialties, which are, for those not quite familiar, motif. When you roll, it's either like from closest to farthest or from left to right. You count first, second, third die. Well, the two specialties you take, you can put the dice in any order after the roll. You can just rearrange them. You're like, no, I don't. I don't want that much of excess. I will take less cost and more success. We'll switch those around.
Those abilities are
Um,
so cool too. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I love the physicality. I talked about this before everyone was here, but like the dice in the space also like where the dice land in the space affect the result and how you interpret
yeah,
them.
yeah, you were so thrilled about that
It's
earlier. You were
so
like, "That's so
cool.
cool." Yeah,
It's really
right. That
cool.
makes me
And so
so happy.
an ability where you can like rearrange the spatial dynamic of the die, like that's a cool class feature that you can't do in
And
pretty
so
much any
they,
other
yeah,
system.
and so I just call it a I'm sure you guys have noticed. I like naming things sort of what they are.
Yeah.
So those are your specialties, man. They let you specialize in, so you've got that fine level of control over even the chaos of outcomes. And
Mhm.
then you've got two kludges, which are, they're sort of hacks.
Mhm.
And what those give you is a reduction on the cost die.
Mm.
So you get a -2 on the cost die. It costs you less to do those two things.
Nice.
Okay.
And then you have two talents, which are what they sound like. You're talented at them, so you get a +2 on the success die instead.
Okay, I
Oh
love that.
yeah.
That's very cool.
So like, so you have one set of skills where you get that fine control, one set of, one pair of skills where you get a reduction in the cost, and then one set of skills where you get the bonus and the strength of your success.
It's so
Um,
clean. So easy to make a playbook or like a splat in
oh
that.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
really
you can just yeah, it's just you pick one of the three character types, and then the list of skills. It's like in my head, I made this. I like doing this with motif games. You can also do open-ended skills with things, but this is such a specific concept. I feel like it needs some
Mhm.
bumpers, so to speak. How skills work in motif is always the same, which is you look at the word is what it is. Do you take an action related to that word? That counts. it's again, everything is very narrative tag based in Motif, and like even the hard mechanics, so to speak. So there's analyze, art, conflict, misdirect, penetrate, perform, protect, search, and stabilize.
Curious about art.
Yeah. So yeah, art is interesting because the world and the network and everything are all interrelated. So you can basically paint on reality. You can do hypermedia art
Okay.
essentially if you want to. Yeah. One thing I want to point out is there's no um dodge or melee or anything like that. There's just conflict, which is literally any kind of conflict. If it's an argument or a fist fight, it doesn't matter. It's conflict. And like there's protect or stabilize or penetrate. You could put those into things, but I'm sure you can see how it's directed more towards sort of living and solving the problem, as we described it with the virus. And you're woken up as a troubleshooter, so you're a troubleshooter, but you're also, as a founder or an engineer or a glitch, sort of have that artistic element or creative element to them. You can do things other people can't. So
it's funny because Motif is an engine that provides answers, and your skills are problem solving, like related, and it feels all intertwined and connected, like, and for good reason. It's elegant, right, in that way.
Yeah, again, it's all narrative tags. So I'm like, what's the narrative? Let's add some tags. It's a good way to look at it.
What's cool about this, about the way Motif addresses the idea that we're talking about, is that it has a similar feel to tactical combat without actually getting into all the dirty, like the numbers and like the grind of that. This still feels like there's lots of problems that you need to solve, and like the abilities feel like they're influencing the narrative in a really interesting way, and it feels fun. Like when you're talking about it, it feels like that's a fun thing to do. I don't have to hit somebody with my sword. I can paint a sculpture to misdirect them. You could even do like a Looney Tune style, like draw a tongue on the wall, and like
you got misdirect in art. Yeah, nah, have fun.
Yeah, you could do like cool stuff. Yeah, so it's like we often think, or maybe it's just me because I come from a D&D background of like, okay, this is what conflict looks like in TTRPGs. This is what combat looks like in TTRPGs. But really, there's so many examples out there of games that provide the same. I think I like tactical combat because it's satisfying. And when I think about why it's satisfying, you get a lot of answers about game design, right? Like, okay, I feel good about this because I made decisions, and then my character has certain features that make them excel at those types of things, and I've accomplished a goal, which is removing a combatant from this, an obstacle in my way. That's the same thing as any of these other things, but you don't have to be like chopping down at someone's hit points for 6 rounds, which is like 3 hours in real life, in order to make that happen. Like, these systems allow you to do a similar tactical, but it's more like tactical storytelling than tactical like turn-by-turn combat. And that it'll go, not only will it go faster, it'll also just be more like, I think it's a more fun story, especially when you're like telling it back to other people. So I think both Motif and Charge do that super well. And you can do it in Caltrip too, but like these systems are like built for this sort of like not effortless, but like smooth narrative flow, which is really cool.
And it's so funny because I don't think I've read I don't think that inside Motif or Caltrip there's any initiative, right? Like when you enter combat, I don't think your games mention initiative.
Well, there's sort of an initiative in some Motif, or a lot of Motif builds, I should say. I often set up 3 stages in a quote-unquote combat round, like, which in the way Motif is set up is described often as just any conflict or any kind of zoomed-in action.
Yeah, like I didn't see it in the like the.
So
in the
you go.
right?
Yeah, you go talking. So everybody
Right.
gets a talking action first. So the players go, and then any unopposed NPCs go. Because if you're opposing an NPC, if you succeed, you succeed. If you fail, they succeed.
Right.
That's kind of how conflict with NPCs works there for the player-facing way that Motif does it. But first, everybody gets a talking action. Then everybody gets a doing action, which is anything you're doing, like physically, isn't opposed. So if you're picking the lock on the door and nobody's stopping you, that's a doing action. And then comes the conflict actions, which is, any kind of direct conflict with another character. So you're arguing with somebody, you're getting in a fist fight, anything, you're, you know, uh, grand puppet masters clashing your world influences at each other. It's still a conflict. And so that goes last and for any kind of time critical or staged thing. So everybody gets a chance. So it's interesting because in play, a lot of times people take advantage of that to like talk their way out of situations or do sort of the cool like adventure movie thing of like popping open the door so everybody can run out.
Right.
Before the conflict happens, you know what I mean? And so I really like kind of the pacing and structure that gives. It's very different than traditional initiative. Like, okay, you're faster than this person. It does it by the action type rather than the individual
Yeah, that's
scores.
there where I was going because Lex was mentioning about like narrative story like flow, and that's basically our three SRDs go basically in that direction. Like things are extremely like put into a frame where everything needs to always happen in that exact like order or whatever. It's basically like, okay, the fiction tells you what happens. You just look at like the mechanics afterwards.
Yeah, for sure.
I know
You have it in charge?
Oh, real quick,
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay.
No. It's
real quick, I want to check in with the chat. We're getting close to 4:00.
Yeah.
If because we've been kind of going on about a lot of topics here, but if you guys want us to sort of push forward and just wrap up our quick builds and get to some questions, or if you guys would be cool with sticking around for another half hour, 45, while we go over things. If you guys can do that, like, what's your timing, RP and Lex? Like, what are your time limits?
I could stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, for a little bit, I can absolutely. I think it'd be good to like we can take our time wrapping up, but still moving in that direction as well.
Yeah. That's what I said. Let's just like half hour 45. Yeah. I don't want to keep anybody too long or anything, but we're sort of at a point where we do have some things to. It would be nice if we could wrap them up. So.
Yeah.
You talked RP. It says in the chat you talked about how you accidentally asked for checks the first time you ran charge.
Yeah, like I was so used. Like I've played a lot of D&D like class. I started with D&D 3.5, like, and I had a very problematic experience. Like when I was like, I guess 13 years old, and then I stopped playing TTRPGs for like 15 years. But I was used to like asking for checks and whatnot, and then like same thing for when I played Fate. Like my players loved rolling dice, and it seems like the dog wants to come in. Okay, all right, I've got to. Okay. So yeah, like when I first ran charge, like my players kept getting momentum because I was always asking for checks a la D&D, or like, oh, do a notice check, do a perception check. We
need a perception check kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, my players loved rolling dice. So, and then eventually, and I took some notes while we were talking, and I feel like there's always three paths in terms of mechanic when there's some uncertainty. I feel like either in the narrative, like for example, like when a player says, what am I looking at? Like, what is in there? I'm trying to look for something. You can always say, well, you see it, or it's right there, it's right in front of you, and you just handle it with the fiction. Then there's like either idle it with luck, like you just make a luck check, or you like fortune roll like in Charge, or like you ask an oracle like in Motif, and it's like, okay, well, like let's see what is in there. Like if you're stuck on a desert island and you're looking for clothes, and maybe there's like some suitcases you want to look, like it's not related to your skill, it's just luck. And then and lastly, it's skill-based checks, right? Like, so it feels like there are always three paths as to how you can handle things. But yeah, like asking for checks often in Charge will break the game. I've broken the game many times because of this, and I actually had to go back to the drawing board because of this.
Yeah, I think for Caltrip Core, there's like, I don't think I've ever asked for a perception check, and like it also really depends on the game too, right? Because like some people do model their games after a more like D20 style system, D20 fantasy style systems, which is totally fine. But the system doesn't really ask for it, so you might as well just get, like, for me, it's like, all right, I'm going to describe the setting here. What everybody sees. There might be like hidden narrative elements here, but it's not like, okay, well, let's do apples to apples, right? Of someone's tailing you, and let's say it's in our hyper reality game, and you're walking the streets of the cyber city, and the players are going from place to place, and they want to know, are we being followed? There's different ways of doing that. You can be like either yes or no. That's one way. You could just say it. Like this RP is like, that's the first way. Second way is like letting the dice decide if that's what's happening. So you have the oracle. You kind of have like, all right, this is the answer to the question, and then here's like the wrinkle, or you have the more complex version as well. In Charge, how would that work? How would you handle that in Charge if the players ask you, like, is there someone tailing us?
If someone is asking me, it basically say, how do you find out? Right, because Charge is action based. So if you're not taking any action, I won't ask you for rolls. As a GM, I can make fortune rolls to know when things are not related to the players. So if the players are not related at all to the action, for example, this faction is fighting against this faction, the players are not related to this. It's like, I'm going to make a fortune roll and just see how things play out, because that's just, we just want to see some dice being rolled and see how the fiction is going to be changed by that. But if a player says, am I being followed? I'm going to ask, what are you doing to know if you're being followed or not?
Right. Gotcha.
So if they
So
say,
that element of Charge, real quick, RP. When I played Charge with a vet and a couple of my thought police connected people, the way I described that is that it was a narrative fog of war. Like, like fog of war in a video game, right? Like, you don't uncover the map until you go there or actually do something. And it's a little different than the concept of like an emergent story, or like the filling in of the painting kind of concept that like Motif goes with. Like, because that's why, because they were used to Motif, where you can ask the oracles questions, and things are very sort of like genre, like storytelling focused, kind of driven. And so when we were playing with Charge, I was like, all right, think of it like a narrative fog of war. Until you move your unit there, or take some like espionage or diplomacy action, like in a game, like you don't get to see that part of the map or get that data.
I'm gonna reuse that. I'm gonna steal that from.
Oh yeah, go please, by all means.
Good.
Like it's just you were talking about it, and that was like a way that made it click for a couple people that I was playing with.
Yeah, and then afterwards, like the player is telling you what they're gonna do. Because if, for example, like someone is following me, well, I could probably sneak. I could probably hide myself and see, like, oh, I'm gonna just jump into that alleyway and see if someone passes by, and then I'm going to follow them. So it's like, okay, well, you're making a sneak action. You're not trying to notice anything. You're just doing something. Where it's like, okay, well, I don't want to know if I'm being followed. I'm just gonna move. I just want to run and like just make sure that I'm not being followed. Or perhaps you do want to notice, but how do you do so without, like, there's a risk? Like, what's the risk? that person could actually notice you noticing them, and then things become like more problematic. So yeah, like since charge is action based, I would ask the player what they want to do, because I'm not going to ask for rolls. They will need to tell me when they want to roll based on their actions. So, but yeah, like the narrative fog of war phrasing is fantastic. It's
So
Yeah,
good.
people in the chat seem to like it too. I hit on something there.
Yeah, you gotta do something with that, because that's like clearly like really like clicking with people.
No, see, now I feel like we're even for you being like about motif. Well, I guess you need a motif.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, there we
I
go.
love this. That's the great collaborative aspect that we talked
Oh,
about during
Well,
the
yeah,
whole
no, I
promotion
mean, I
episode.
love
so
you
good.
guys. You're awesome,
You
and just
too.
Yeah,
like
it's great.
it's I don't know, yeah, just sometimes with people getting cagey about their game preferences, it feels so nice as just a gamer, not even as an SRD author or anything, to sit down with other people and be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, man,
Let's talk games. Let's talk about the thing that we like a lot.
yeah, let's
Uh,
just hang out like like we're just all like kind of at the university gaming club and friends and hanging out, man. Like,
yeah, just talking some
that's the way I always
theory.
kind of constantly frame it, because that's the vibe that comes to mind for me. Like, we're just hanging out at the coffee shop or up at the student union or whatever, man, and just
Yeah, it's real nice. I think
yeah,
for Caltrip Core, typically since the games are so the scope is a lot smaller in most cases, where it's not supposed to do like a whole big thing. I think if you're boots on the ground in our hyper reality idea, um, I would also try to rephrase it like, so what is it you want to do? It's like, oh, I want to escape the scene without being followed, right? It's not, do
Okay.
I notice anyone following us? I don't know. That's whatever it is. It's not, the system doesn't govern that. It's just not part of what the system is designed to do. But if you want to escape without being noticed, then you'll roll whatever the stat is related to that. So, for example, I'm working on an RPG right now where one of the stats is smart, and so you'll roll your smart stat. You'll take the highest result and reference it on the table. If you roll a two, you're let's just say you roll a three. A three is pretty interesting. You get what you want, but there's a complication, right? So yes, you're not being followed. You've escaped without being followed, but when you show up to the place the safe house, somebody's there. And maybe it's not like a total like a bad thing, but like someone's there and they know you were out. And that's maybe, you don't have the alibi anymore of where you were when you were trying to escape the scene here of some sort of, maybe there's a riot situation, or like you were doing a break-in to a high security tech company and you were trying to steal secrets, that sort of thing. Someone knows that you were coming home at the time of this big break-in, so that's a wrinkle there. But like, I find it less interesting, and the system itself doesn't lend itself towards like hard and fast skill checks. Really, it's more of like, all right, what do you want this? What do you want Caltech Core to govern? And then like it's sort of like you get to design a small game with a small scope, and then you can really make it a tight experience. Like, again, I'm gonna keep bringing up Nighthawks because I'm, first of all, really proud of it. Second of all,
It's beautiful.
it's fun. Like I've run it a couple of times from different people. It's great. Um, if someone asks me, do I see someone here? I'm like, I don't know. Do you? Like, tell me what's the story you want for your character? Is it more interesting if your character sees this person from their past? What do they look like? Tell me about it. It's a much more like collaborative. Um, a lot of them you can run GM-less, like Nighthawks you can run GM-less, but if you have a GM, it's like, well, the GM is going to collaborate with you to say, like, what does your character see? I want to know too, because I'm here for the story. Basically, the GM gets to just hang out while the other people tell a cool story, and the GM sort of just facilitates.
So
Yeah.
what I love about Caltrop Core, touching on what you were just saying, is that to me it is like the next generation of like 1-2 page RGBG system.
Hell
Yeah, I
yeah.
can't even talk, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's, in a lot of ways, it is like it is sort of in the same tier or corner of design as like Honey Heist or Lasers and Feelings. That that type of design,
Yeah.
but it introduces the type of thing that both Charge and Motif have, where it's there's degrees of outcome and variability to things like that. That yes, but you know, um, it works more like a core system rather than like a reflavorable thing. I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm making sense there, but it does feel like it's in that range, like because like you're saying, it's this tight, focused experience. These nice, simple, like very contained games, and so it makes me think of those types of short games, but it's somehow like more advanced in a way. It feels
That's
like because it
because
feels like more like a kind of sort of traditional play, or and there's more complexity to results.
it's amazing because when you look at Culture Core, like Lex on Twitter, you've said multiple times that like, hey, Culture is simple, and that's fine. That's the way it was designed for. But I think the moment where my brain exploded as I read Culture Core is that its simplicity is embedded, but it's also smart in the fact that when I read the combat rules, I was like, okay, you're rolling a d4 and it tells you how much you succeed and whatever, but what I thought was very clever is that the impact of your action, the effect of your action, is also the result of your die, and that is elegant. Because if you're rolling a d12 and a d4, you've got a system with tons of dice, then using the result of the die becomes complicated because you're going to have things that are very unbalanced. A 12 and a 1 are so very far apart,
Mhm.
but with a condensed result of 1 and 4, having say you rolled a 3, you do 3 damage, or you do like 2 damage. It's this is where my brain was like, okay, this is clever.
Thank you. It is a lot like a lot of the complexity that you can add to the system is really the whatever tables you can come up with that can fit on a D4 that you can sort of like create as much depth as you would like. It can get cumbersome, of course, if you get too many tables, but it is sort of like a fun. I don't know what to say. Thank you both for the very kind words. It's very nice.
Listen,
And
we're in the role-playing game market. There is decidedly a large number of people who love their tables.
yeah,
So,
that's true. That's
I
true.
mean, it's not. Don't make it sound like it's a bad thing, because it's not.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing like a right now I'm like working on a Metabots inspired game, which is like I guess 90s or early 2000s anime where kids had, a robot and the robot could swap out parts. And so I've got a bunch of different tables for the different types of like tag. I'm doing under like it's sort of like a tag system for it as well. And we got like you can design a big hammer that does a different thing when you roll than a big gun, and you just like change up the table a little bit and you have a fresh new mechanic or ability. And I forgot how we got to this point in the conversation, but I'm uh
We're
I'm
just
hyped for
sort of
that game.
following the road wherever it goes
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So focusing up a little bit real quick to finish up my build.
Mhm.
I went over how we got like the 3 tiers of pairs, one where you can rearrange them, one where you can get a discount on cost, one where you get the better success. And so I'm thinking about sort of like conditions and things like that, and like what happens when bad things happen, and also sort of like, how do they, what's the economy for their abilities and stuff. So I'm going with Quanta and Self.
Ooh.
Quanta is like your charge, basically, like how much, in a simplistic sense, like how much your batteries are charged.
Mhm.
you know um can let you add like a +1 to a die after a roll, ±1 to a die after a roll. And it also can let you do like exceptional feats with your character types.
Mhm.
um so like with engineers and their coding, you could spend a quanta to bypass a security wall or something, so that you can do what you need to do. And then self is sort of like your coherency, your sense of feeling like you.
Mm.
And so instead of taking any kind of damage, your self track can go down. And then the tracks can only temporarily get to 0, and so when you're at 0 quanta, you can't use your character type abilities.
Mm.
Um, and then when your self gets to 0, you become a phantom. You become like an echo.
Ooh, a ghost
But
in the
you
machine.
can't affect anything. You can still take talking actions. You can still like share your knowledge or anything with other people, but you can't directly do anything when your self gets to 0 until the next scene.
You've sort of dissolved into the hyper
Yeah,
reality.
you just become like a faded echo.
Love that.
And then for the corruption kind of system, you have errors and infection, which I talked a little bit about the concept earlier. So errors are like, yeah, you're accumulating errors in your thoughts, in your code, however you wanna, in your soul, however you wanna phrase it. And as you build up errors, yeah, you can glitch out, can have mistakes in your actions and stuff. And then once the track fills up, it resets and you gain an infection. And with an infection, you gain permanent glitches. You get a severe
Ooh,
downfall, but a minor benefit with it.
nice.
Is
Oh, that's cool.
the concept I
Like you
have.
can use your glitch to your advantage, you mean, right?
Right.
Okay.
So you might have to roll a check die, and if you roll, at the first level of the corruption, you might have to, if you roll a 1 on that extra check die, like you temporarily, for that round, basically go like yourself is 0, you become intangible.
Ooh.
But as a minor benefit, you might be able to roll a 50-50 chance to fall through walls or doors or so on.
Yeah,
Which could lead
Yes.
to some pretty funny moments when you try and you roll the other side of that 50%. You just bam, right
Walk
into the
into a
wall.
door.
But
we're back to this
yeah, that's like
allocate
one
from
of the
market problem.
examples that's in my head, and I would include a few examples as I wrote this up. But and that would really be the complete build. I would kind of keep it. I mean, there's already enough moving parts to it and everything. But I wouldn't really go deeper into the build with any kind of special combat rules or coding rules. Like what the advice I would include, as I often do with the motif stuff, is just what makes sense for the story that you're telling, what makes sense for the themes you're trying to go for the genre that you're playing in. Um, Even if you're not like a big reader or big movie consumer, just by cultural exposure, you understand. Like, you could never have read anything cyberpunk in your life, and you understand the concept of cyberpunk.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
basic tropes. So, that's pretty much where what I would do with it. Because to me, that feels like a complete game and a really good initial draft build for just a quick build. That's
It's
pretty complex. Yeah.
playable and it seems pretty fun. Like, and that's all you need for a first draft is like it's playable and pretty fun. Like that's a successful first
Yep.
draft.
It's
You can
a
always
game.
fill
It's
in
supposed to be
extra
fun.
subsystems or rules or if something comes up a lot and people just always hit a roadblock on it because it's a big question, you could always include that as whether play guidance or a set of rules, or you need to add a subsystem to kind of guide people. Yeah, you can always do things after testing or release when people are like, "Hey," you can be like, "Oh, well, let's fix that then, or add
Let's do
to it,
something
or
about it.
whatever we need to do." Yeah, but yeah, first draft. I mean, like it's like anything else. Like if you want to be a painter, you have to start by painting a painting. It doesn't have to be a good painting at first. It doesn't have to be a finished painting even.
Mhm.
Or just like drawing. If you just draw an outline of the sketch, like write a first draft of a short story,
That's a
that's one
big
thing I want
thing.
to, encourage people. Just get it down on paper.
Mhm.
You can, and if all that's in your head is, I hate this blank page, write that 10 times. That's right. I hate this blank page. And you will start writing something else. It doesn't matter what you write down. And you can always cut out the garbage later.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because believe me, when I was typing up notes here as we were talking, like there's about 4 times this of what I said, and 90% of it's just going out the door. It's
The
just
thing I like to say is that
random junk. Just
it's
gotta just file it down.
it's harder to make something simple than to make sorry, it's easier to make something hard than to make something simple. Basically, it's like you can add as many such system as you want, but then eventually your thing becomes cluttered, and it's like the more you remove, the better the end result is often going to be.
You want the minimal amount of mechanics to make the game that you want to make.
Yeah.
But it really all depends on your taste, like varying levels of complexity.
Sure.
And like Rev said, just getting started is like that's the biggest thing, and that's something I harp on in the Couch of Core SRD of like just make something. It's not good. The first game's not going to be good. It's just not, and that's fine. Or at least the first draft of the first game. Then you can go
Release it
back
is
and
important. You need to release it, right? That way you can learn and start that feedback loop.
Yeah, at least test it, at least play it, test it. Like I'm like doing a lot of rounds of testing for my like the reason I know tactical combat is hard to do in Couch Court is because I'm doing it right now. It's freaking hard. It's hard to do, but it's possible. So the
So real
only way
quick,
to do it is play it.
do you lack hey people out there, do you lack playtesters? You won't even have to buy my products. I'll tell you how to do it right now. Take 3 dice and just ask them questions. And it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't have to be about the world. It can be about what a player would do. Write down, 2 or 3 short phrases or words that describe the kind of player they are.
Yeah.
Make a character for them that fits that kind of player. And then if you have any questions, you know what? You can keep it pretty simple. Just roll 2 dice. Be like, hey, are you going to do this? Yes or no? How firm, how hard they go on it, basically, for the second die. Or if or you could add in, do they have reservations, and but. And just just roll with it, and you'll see how your system plays out. I mean, that right there is like, you could just, there you go. Free 30-second motif tip to test your own game if you can't find play testers is just, write a few descriptive tags to make a player type in your head that you can picture, and give them a character, and just, you can let so that there's uncertainty. You can just ask dice when you're uncertain, like, would this player do this? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Go RP. I want to hear you. I want to finish your build.
Yep.
Honestly, my build is pretty much finished, and if I have other tasks, I'll probably just like do them like directly inside the document. I think I've got my pretty basic idea of how I plan on doing this. Again, I don't plan on adding tons of mechanics because I don't want to clutter things too much of it. Like
were you going to have any special abilities?
It depends. Like in charge special abilities,
or were you going to kind of go more like a ground level, personal sort of level, feel?
Well, you talked about narrative tags, and Charge Angel's special abilities a bit like that. Like if you have a narrative tag that says that you're flying, well, you can fly. That's it. That's just it. You can fly, and you don't need to spend a token to be able to fly. Your character can just fly, right? So I'd probably handle like special abilities like that, or I'd handle them using talents, which are like narrative permissions that are temporarily available. So that's probably how I would handle them.
How would I make it temporarily available? Is it like a roll, or do I spend a resource?
the fiction will tell you how long it's
Oh,
going to be
okay.
available for. So, for example,
Like a fiction
let's
first sort of resolution.
That's right. So for your talent, like talents are a bit like kind of like a bonus on effect on or the position of your role. So either your position is more safe or you're gonna have a greater effect. But the time frame as to when it's going to be available is going to be dictated by what I call situational. Like it's a situational talent in the sense that let's say, for example, I'm inside this universe and I'm a hacker, but I'm only very good at hacking like terminals when I'm under pressure. So that could be a talent. Like for example, if I've got a lot of time, I'm gonna have an okay effect. I'm still a great hacker, so I'm gonna be good. But if I'm under pressure and people are chasing me, then like you've got this effect, this bonus on effect that happens because people are rushing towards you. So like those talents kind of work like that. So it's just, hey,
Oh my god, I
GM, like
love that. I love that so much because it leans into like the action movie thing that I was talking about earlier with Charge. Because, yeah, there's like the expert hacker, and it would normally take him an hour to break that level of security under like the best conditions with like a supercomputer at his hands. But you know, people are shooting at his friends, and you know they're like shooting around the corner like a heist movie, you know.
yeah.
And so the guy, like, you know, plugs in his little friggin' Mac laptop and just hacks it in 30 seconds. And so I love that so much because it fits. Like I said, like I was saying, like the thing I like about all three SRDs is the thing they share is emulating genre. And it
Yeah.
just, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, like
It's really cool because it's like the reverse of what you would think, right? It's like, oh, he's actually better when under pressure, which is a very action movie thing. Yeah.
definitely. And you can have all sorts of talents like that. It's just like a talent gets activated based on what's happening in the fiction. So if you want it to get activated, for example, if you want to get this bonus on effect, you need to put yourself in trouble. You need to have people chasing you. That way, you're going to be better. So it's all based around that. So that's probably how I would handle like superpowers or things like that. It's just like situational bonuses that are awarded to you based on what is happening in the fiction.
That's awesome.
So,
What
Lex, how about you? Like, how would you finish up, like, round out your build?
I would actually, what I'm thinking of now is like spending more time on the hex level of the of play because on the character level, there's a lot it would take a lot more manual labor on my part to create like playbooks that are very satisfying and diverse to play the way your systems it would be. But I think Caltrip Core would be really great for like I would spend more time. So like at the hex level, maybe there's faction abilities or like you get bonuses when you are flanking a hex tile, you know, sort of like tactical, but also sort of abstracted conflict at a city level for the sort of like vying for spheres of influence. I think tokens, we would bring the tokens, and maybe the tokens could even represent your health, your HP in a way. I'm sort of interested in this idea of in like political intrigue HP is not necessarily like your life points because assassinations are very rare in most political spheres. They're very dramatic, very big movements. But I think like tokens could represent your political capital and how much influence you can have on a map as a whole. And perhaps even perhaps there's like abilities that allow you to affect adjacent hex tiles in a certain way, but or maybe you have like a specific faction ability that allows you to affect a hex tile on the other side of the city because you're donating certain tokens to that side, and maybe there's a drawback to your own like closer territory. I think there's a lot to play with there. Like I could do the boots on the ground style, but like listening to y'all's ideas for how you would do it, I'm like, I don't need to do that. Like that, your systems handle that a lot better. What I do think I can do is almost like a board game element on top of it, and perhaps like if you control a hex tile for a certain amount of time or a certain type of hex tile, you get certain types of resources, and perhaps like maybe you can get like general tokens and then like focused tokens or like specialized tokens where like this token can be used as like a generic token and it counts as one, but if you use this, like maybe you have an ability where if you're using it for a specific purpose, then it counts for two tokens. Something like that where you change the economy of the token economy based on what your faction and your group is good at. And so I think that could lend itself to really fun styles of play. Perhaps you want to do a brute force hostile takeover of a sector of this city. Maybe you want to do a little bit more of an insidious, sort of puppet master style, and maybe there could be different, maybe have like faction playbooks versus, I think individuals might just have like different stats, and they can do things like on a face-to-face level. There's a little bit of difference, but it's like the faction and collaborative play of what your table wants to do to almost like city management style. And you kind of work with your group to decide how you're going to expend resources, what kind of skills you want to do. I think that actually sounds more fun to me to create, which likely means it would be more fun to play.
Yeah, definitely.
That's
And
what I
it's
would.
cool
That's
because
how I want to go.
it's because it can drill down from there, right? Like at this top level, you know what you control, you know where you want to get, so it drives your goals. It drives, like, it affects so many things. I feel so. Yeah, this is definitely a very cool idea.
Thanks.
Awesome. I think that wraps up. I think that we've pretty much got our builds covered and everything there, and we had like a really great discussion that went all over the place about game design. Um, so there was a question earlier, and but I'm going to poke people who are listening and watching and say, hey, if you have any questions, please go ahead and jump in the panel B chat room and let us know what your questions are so that we can answer them for you and help you get started on your journey or continue on if you've written some games before. So the question someone had earlier was how we handle resources. Um, in Motif, I love using tracks. People like clocks and pools and things. I like tracks. They're fun. Um,
They're similar. They're basically all the same thing. It's just handled
oh
differently.
yeah, just sort of a different way to handle the same things, really. Yeah. And so the way I do one way of handling resources that I like doing is through stones, so to speak, or pips, or resource tracks, basically. And in one of my games, Never Stop Smiling, they're a really big part of it. In the game, you're an agent of a post-apocalyptic city, which is all you really need to know for the purposes of this. And um, the two types of big resources stones that you have are favor and secrets.
Ooh.
And so favor is like how good you're in with community leaders and your superiors, like the government church of the city state that you're in, this post-apocalyptic city. And and secrets are, yeah, your access to secrets, because there's a lot of secrets in, a post-apocalyptic world, a broken world, and about the city itself. Um, and so I like introducing resources when they matter. Otherwise, I mostly kind of ignore them.
Yeah.
I don't really worry about money or equipment if it just whatever makes common sense for the characters usually. But with that game, the economy of your, trying to maintain your good standing while you're becoming increasingly unstable is a fun, uh, you know, tension point. And secrets are great. You want to seek out secrets, but secrets can make you more unstable. So, um, there's the trade-off aspect there. So there's it reinforces some nice themes, it introduces some nice tensions, and so when I do it with motif, that's how I approach resources. Is does it matter, or is it really super interesting to the gameplay? Like, I mean, it would be nice to know exactly how much money you have, but we can just kind of go with our gut for 90% of cases, or at least that's how I feel as a designer and as a player.
Mhm.
How would you do it, Lex?
I think Caldric Core just by virtue of being so simple, sort of like also ignores that type of granularity unless unless you inject it yourself in a way you like. But one thing I really like with the system is like narrative resources, which is something the player has and the characters kind of the players have it, and then the characters are not super aware of it. So again, in Nighthawks, you have the tokens to expend like your ability they like represent your ability to reach out to other people, and there's the isolation die, which is sort of like a resource in itself, but is more similar to hit points than it is to like gold or equipment. Um, I think I would go with abstracting it. I think we were talking in the chat. I saw people talking about this. Like abstracting resources is probably the way to go in sort of narrative first games. Um, I think even in the hex crawl political resource game that I'm sort of formulating, it would still be abstracted political resources of this is a favor I can pull, or this is a sort of like I'm sort of calling in favors. These are favors I'm offering to someone else, or these are like people, like very good operatives that I have that I can send over there to do things. But it would sort of be more like levels of resources, and I would probably use like a D4 to track what level of resources you're at, which is similar to a clock. It's the same thing, like RP was saying. Just like because you'll have D4s on hand, you might as well use those. And 4 levels of resources is like, okay, 1, you're broke. 2, you've got something, but it's a little bit sketch. 3, you're feeling pretty. And 4, you're like, you've got more than you know what to do, an embarrassment of riches, right? So it's a much, and then when you spend stuff, if you have a failure or it costs more than you thought it was going to cost, then it ticks down. That's something like that. That's how I would handle it.
Yeah. What about how does charge handle things, RP, like in terms of resources?
Well, like YouTube, like resources are kind of abstracted. I personally don't like doing resource management, and like I was playing Horizon Zero Dawn recently, and the fact that my backpack can be full is something that I hate. I just don't care. So charge doesn't handle that, though. If it was something very important, like we've talked about, like political game, like if for example you manage an entire faction and your family or your house has money and you want to handle that in some way. One cool thing about Charge is that sure, it's free and open license, but it's also it welcomes contributions. So the entire Fari community actually brings back extras and ideas into the system. So the system is nothing like it was 6 months ago because the community keeps adding to it. And I've actually worked with Kaida Creations, who's in the chat right now, to work on something called the attachment extra. So it's an extra rule that is added on top of Charge. I think Nuga also on the Far Discord was working with us on that. Like getting contributors, but basically this is kind of like you've got a clock that goes down and you need to start a long project to put it back up. So if you could, for example, like break your resource, so it's like it goes down. It's like, oh, let's say for example, you want to favor or something. It's like, well, you can roll, or you could, for example, just get an instant win and just break your resource, and it goes from like 4 segments to 3, 2, 1, and then eventually you're broke and you don't have resources anymore, and you need to start a new projects to get those riches back. So that's probably one way I would handle it, but I personally don't like doing that in my games. But if I were to make a political kind of game, I'd probably use an extra like this one.
So 2 things real quick. One thing I forgot to mention about stones is that when I do resources, they're usually bouncy. They're meant to be spent and used, and then, you can gain or lose them based on the actions that you take. In a way, it's the same way I handle a corruption track. If you do things, you can lose some. If you do things, you can gain some. And so, like, secrets and favors work exactly like that. If you get a good mission report, you gain some favor stones. You discover a secret book, you gain the secret stone. You can
Easy
spend a
peasy.
secret stone to find a secret entrance, or it's pretty
all about
straightforward.
resource management.
So somebody asked about encumbrance too. I responded in the chat and text and said, for me, what's encumbrance? Or rather, I handle it like I handle resources. If it's
Same. What
like
is
if it were
that?
like for a survival game, I might I might have a track where that
Yeah.
can go up and down depending on what your actions are. I mean, just like I handle other resources. I don't know how you would have a different answer to encumbrance or carrying capacity.
I would do an exhaustion die probably and use it the same way as I described the resources 1 through 4. It's pretty much all like how many more levels. It's like, do I have 66 pounds or 72 pounds in my, like, it doesn't, who cares?
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Go
Like,
play, you can play a different game if you want. Like, that's fine if you like that. And there's lots of games that do that. Video games do that a lot. D&D 5e has rules for it that nobody uses because it sucks. It sucks to track encumbrance. Even people
I'm
who have it don't use it, like,
I'm currently reading the One Ring, like I've mentioned it earlier, and
uh,
like it has rules for like items of weight, and you need to like when you weight too much, eventually you become like less good at doing your actions, and it's just like I'm not interested in that. Like
yeah.
like
I think the I've seen people play Dark Souls. I never played Dark Souls myself, but there's like it affects your like literal rolling, like your dodge roll if you have too
yeah.
much weight and you don't have the stats to match it. I would maybe do something like that if I were interested in a sort of encumbrance idea where it has an effect on like a mechanic that you like, but I wouldn't track it like line by line. It would be more of like an abstracted like levels of degrees of encumbrance, but who cares?
Somebody was asking in chat, how does the resource exhaustion dice roll work?
For exhaustion, like I would do like encumbrance only matters insofar as your character cannot handle that level of encumbrance, right? Like if your character has the ability to do that, then it's not an issue. If they don't have it, or if that ability is being stressed, then that's when it has narrative significance in the first place. So for exhaustion, like if let's say it's maybe it's a journey based game, like a traveling and you're carrying things, which that's the only place that to me would make sense to have encumbrance, where it's like, oh, I'm carrying these goods from one place to another. Perhaps like dropping to 0, if you're on the 1 and then you incur a failure to tick it down to 0, then that's when there would be some sort of narrative consequence.
So,
Your
like, when
character.
I make the roll, am I looking at how much I'm carrying or what my
Oh, the dice
current,
roll.
yeah, like my current rating is? How does it we'll say I'm at a 1, and so I'm carrying, we'll say, like, a heavy capacity triggers a roll, you
Mhm.
know, like, do I have to roll, a 1 or under? Or, like, if I'm at a
Gotcha.
4, like,
Gotcha.
like, how does that work?
So in that case, it would make sense for you to, let's say you have some sort of like a power stat or a strength stat. I would
Hmm.
imagine this is like a system where that would make sense. Roll your strength stat, take the highest one, or if you have like a condition, if you want to introduce conditions like in the other ones where you're weakened or something, maybe you take the lower of or you take the second highest die. That's sort of a way that I've been introducing sort of like a little bit more complexity into Caltrip Core is taking the second highest when in X situation, right? So let's say if your character is weak and is making this roll, you'll roll your stat and then take the second highest roll. If it's a 3, 3 and higher, I would create a table that's sort of similar to the base table of 3, you're still fine, but there's a complication where like maybe you take an extra condition because of whatever it is. But for this scene, you're able to carry this weight, no problem. A 4 obviously would be a great success. 2 is and if it's a 2 and you're at 1, you would drop to 0, and that's still like the other party members have to figure out what to do with you, and maybe you fall unconscious, and maybe you're no longer able to carry your own weight through the scene, and the other characters have to carry it for you, and then they have to deal with those consequences. If you roll a 1, you're fully unconscious, and things get really bad, and perhaps that's when the bears show up to get the provisions, and like it starts to get really narratively dicey. That's sort of, I think, how I would do it just off the top of my head.
Okay,
I
awesome.
love it.
I'm just scanning the chat to see if I missed any questions that were asked.
Seems like we
Or,
covered.
you know, if there's anything that you guys would like to add or expound upon while we're wrapping up here.
I'm good. I'm sort of running out of juice, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I am really proud of the narrative fog of war.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway.
I like my personal
Like, that's a highlight for me.
Absolutely. We'll have to clip that when we get this recording all done up. We'll clip that part for sure.
Definitely. Chubby Crow saying, "Why are you
Somebody
so
asked
awesome?"
why we're all so awesome. That's because you're delusional. Please seek professional help. I assure you, I'm not awesome.
I'd actually said that you all are awesome. Everyone is in the chat right now.
Everybody who's like listening to us talk, like, thank you. Yeah. Like, that's so cool.
No, I mean, you guys were so engaged, and you know, you just also positive, and I'd really, I just posted on Twitter because I saw JennCon was coming up, and I've really been wanting to do some, some virtual cons. I miss doing cons. And I just posted on Twitter saying, hey, if I got some mutuals who'd be interested in doing a thing, I'd really like to do a panel, and here's a few different ideas. RP and Lex were like, oh, that would be great. And I was like, oh, this is so awesome. Because first of all, I love both of them. They're both wonderful people.
Same to you too.
I always have the most positive interactions with them. And also, what's really cool is all three of us were just featured at the end of last year in a Dicebreaker article about SRDs you could use to write your own TTRPG. And so that's why we kind of did, this panel, like Make Your Own TTRPG Today, because that was sort of our connection is like we all, did SRDs. We were all in that Dicebreaker article together, and and this went so amazingly well. And again, thank you guys so much for responding to my post and coordinating with me and working with me to do this. I love you guys.
Thank you for the invite. And yeah, Rev did a lot of the heavy lifting of the organization behind the scenes, of writing up the pitch for the panel and all the stuff.
The promotion.
Really appreciate. Like, Rev, thank you for basically bringing us into bringing us on to the panel, and you did a lot of the organization, and it's been a pleasure.
I mean, I'm, I won't say I'm an old man, but it won't be too long before I'm an old man. So, I've had a lot of experience with RPG and geek conventions and stuff over the years, and so, also doing like adult sex ed and things like that, and so I've done a lot of panels, I've done a lot of workshops, and so I'm just happy that I could kind of like bring you guys into that. And I mean, you guys are both amazing people and amazing creators, and I know from when I got started, it was made a lot easier because I was on a couple panels with people who were really cool, who had experience with doing them, so pass it on. So that's what I want. You guys have to pass it on to somebody else.
Yep, now. Absolutely, we'll do that.
Yeah,
for sure. Do we want to give a little promote your stuff and throw some links in the chat if we have those links readily available? I guess since I'm talking, I'll just say, hey again, I'm Lex, Titanomic RPG on Twitter. Make a game with Caltrip Core, or Motif, or Charge, or all three. I saw you, Chubby Crow in the chat saying first game ever was a Caltrip Core game, now making game with Charge, and then is going to look at Motif. So That's
It's amazing.
perfect. That's wonderful. Thank you for giving my little thing a shot. And also, I mean, obviously these systems are incredible. So you're going to learn a lot just from reading them. I sure did. So come hang out on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most accessible. Ask questions. If I don't have the answer, I can ask these two and other people who have a lot of experience as well. And we'll have a good time making some awesome games.
Yes. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Again, thank you so much for your positivity, and thank you again to my panel co-hosts. And it was great to have you guys, and this was just so much fun. I really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah,
I still couldn't believe when I got this notification from you, Rev, on Twitter that I was mentioned, like Charge was mentioned along your SRDs in that Dicebreaker article. Like,
oh my God,
I was hyped for like 3 weeks. It was
so great. Yeah,
it's like holy crap.
Yeah. Also, like quickly, like my name is René Pierre. Call me RP. I'm RPDA. I'll write it up in the chat on Twitter. I'll also add a link to my itch store if you want to check out Charge or other games I've released. I'm currently hosting the Charge Creation Jam. There's a couple of days left, like maybe 10 days to make a Charge game. So that's the perfect opportunity to do so. I'll post a link to the SRD, and I've also released a pretty cool survival or role-playing game that fits on a half-loaf brochure that I've printed right there. It's called Breathless. It's pretty cool. It fits like this, and the character sheet's on the back. So if you want to check it out, it's only $5.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that half-page SRD there, RP.
Oh yeah, like I need to release this. I saw you two updating your SRDs with like updated version. I'm like, I don't have enough time, but yeah, there's a condensed version of Charge that's gonna fit on the same kind of format that's coming. So stay tuned for this.
That's right. I released 1.0 version 1.0 of Couch of Core today, but right before the panel because it's been 0.0 for a long time, and then it's out. Go check it out. Rev, would you do the honors of closing us out by telling us about yourself and where people can find and support you?
Yeah. So I'm Rev. I've been playing around making games and stuff for a couple decades now. Mostly just sort of privately, like Zine culture distributed type stuff. And I Thought Police really got off the ground and got started when I actually was recovering from a few years of like really bad seizures. And a couple of my good friends from the gaming circle who just liked the stuff that I did got together, and my friends live in gym. And we're like, so listen, you've been trying to release your role playing game stuff, and so we're gonna help you. And so that's and then when Leah had to take a sabbatical, I started becoming more active on Twitter over the past half year or so. And so yeah, that's who I am. I'm gonna post my links, what my current promo, American Healthcare Sucks. My store link and a direct link to the SRD. The SRD is, of course, totally free. It's cool if you want to leave a tip, but you don't have to. And there's also some example games that are technically included as the part of the SRD. There's 3 of them, and that's linked in under the SRD link. You can download those, pay what you want to, and also use them directly in your games.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it again.
Thanks for your time.
I'll see y'all on Twitter, and I'll see everybody in the audience on Twitter too, hopefully. Thanks again. This is wonderful.
Yeah,
have a good day, y'all.
Thank you. Love you all.
Love you all. Bye.